Some rooms remember which way they were meant to face. Others seem to have forgotten on purpose. The town of Columbia Falls sits in Washington County, Maine, roughly 3 hours northeast of Bangor along Route 1. It is a quiet place, the kind of town where the population has hovered around 500 for over a century, where the Machias River moves slowly past old timber yards, and where the winters arrive early and stay long. Most visitors pass through without stopping. Those who do stop usually come for one reason: the Ruggles House. Built in 1818 by Thomas Ruggles, a wealthy lumber dealer and local judge, the house is considered one of the finest examples of Federal period architecture in New England. It sits on a gentle slope overlooking the river, its clapboard exterior painted the pale yellow it has worn for 2 centuries. The house is small by mansion standards, just 2 stories with a central chimney, but its interior is famous for its craftsmanship. The flying staircase, unsupported by any visible means, has been studied by architects from as far as Boston and Philadelphia. The hand-carved woodwork took a single craftsman named Alva Peterson 3 years to complete, using only a penknife. But it is not the staircase or the woodwork that has drawn a quieter kind of attention over the years. It is the parlor. The east parlor of the Ruggles house was designed according to the original 1817 blueprints held in the Maine Historical Society archives to face due east. This was intentional. Thomas Ruggles was known to be a man of routine, and he insisted that his morning room catch the first light of day. The windows were positioned to frame the sunrise over the river. The fireplace was set into the west wall so that the warmth would not compete with the natural light. The problem is that the parlor does not face east. In 1973, a surveyor named Donald Haskell was hired by the state to prepare documentation for the house's inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places. Haskell, a 42-year veteran of land surveying in Downeast, Maine, spent 3 days measuring the property. His report, filed in November of that year, contains a footnote that was never addressed in the final registration documents. The east parlor, Haskell wrote, registers at approximately 83 degrees on the compass. Repeated measurements confirm this reading. However, 83 degrees does not correspond to any standard cardinal or intercardinal direction. Cross-referenced with satellite data and USGS topographic maps, the orientation of the room does not align with the recorded position of the house's foundation. I have no explanation for this discrepancy and recommend further analysis. No further analysis was ever conducted. The first recorded complaint about the parlor came in 1951 from a visiting school teacher named Harriet Bowman. Bowman, who was touring the house with a group from Machias, later wrote a letter to the Historical Society describing her experience. "I felt watched," she wrote, "not from the doorway or the windows, but from somewhere near the northwest corner of the room. There is no corner there, only flat wall. But I could not shake the sense that something was standing just behind me at an angle I couldn't turn toward." Bowman's letter was filed and forgotten, but similar accounts followed. In 1968, a photographer named Ellis Cormier spent an afternoon documenting the interior for a University of Maine architectural survey. Cormier, who had photographed over 200 historic homes across New England, later told colleagues that the Ruggles parlor was the only room he had ever been unable to properly expose. "The light didn't behave," he said in a 1982 interview with Downeast magazine. "Every shot came out slightly tilted, even when I used a level. And there was always a shadow in the northwest corner that didn't match any object in the room." Cormier's photographs were never published. The negatives, according to university records, were lost during a departmental move in 1979. Local residents speak about the parlor carefully, if they speak about it at all. Margaret Foss, who served as a volunteer guide at the house from 1984 to 2003, recalled her first solo tour during a 2010 oral history project. I was explaining the woodwork to a couple from New Jersey, she said, and the woman asked me why the room felt crooked. I told her it wasn't. The floors are level. The walls are plumb. But she kept saying she felt like she was leaning. Her husband agreed. He said it was like standing on a boat that wasn't moving. Foss admitted that she avoided lingering in the parlor after that. You get used to it, she said, but you never get comfortable. In 2001, a team from the University of Southern Maine's Department of Geography conducted an informal study of the house using handheld GPS units. Their findings, never formally published, circulated among faculty for years. According to Dr. Randall Thurlow, who supervised the study, the GPS units returned inconsistent coordinates when used inside the parlor. Outside the house, we got clean readings, Thurlow said. Inside most rooms, same thing. But in the parlor, the units couldn't agree. One would say we were 6 meters north of where we actually stood. Another would place us outside the building entirely. Thurlow submitted a request to return with more advanced equipment. The request was denied by the Historical Society, citing concerns about disruption to the preservation site. No reason was given for why a non-invasive GPS study would be considered disruptive. The blueprints remain in the Maine Historical Society's climate-controlled archive in Portland. They have been examined by at least 4 independent architectural historians since 1973. All 4 confirmed that the parlor, as drawn, should face east. All 4 declined to comment on why the built room does not. In 2014, a graduate student named Miriam Alcott attempted to include the Ruggles parlor discrepancy in her thesis on spatial anomalies in colonial American architecture. Her advisor, whose name she has asked to remain private, discouraged her from pursuing the topic. He told me it was a dead end, Alcott said in a 2018 podcast interview. He said some inconsistencies aren't worth explaining. When I asked what he meant, he changed the subject. Alcott's thesis, eventually submitted in 2015, makes no mention of the Ruggles house. The most recent incident on record occurred in 2019, when a family from Quebec visited the house during a summer road trip. The father, a civil engineer named Jean-Luc Brossard, posted a detailed account on an architecture forum 3 weeks later. According to Brossard, his 9-year-old daughter refused to enter the parlor after standing in the doorway for approximately 15 seconds. When asked why, she said, "The corner is wrong. It's not where it's supposed to be." Brossard measured the room himself using a laser distance meter. He posted his findings. The northwest corner of the parlor, where the 2 walls should meet, registered as 14 centimeters farther away than the visible walls would suggest. He described this as geometrically impossible. The Ruggles house remains open to the public from June through October. Guided tours last approximately 45 minutes. The parlor is included on every tour, though guides have been observed moving through it more quickly than other rooms. No official explanation has ever been offered for the compass discrepancy, the GPS anomalies, or the consistent reports of unease. The Maine Historical Society's website describes the house as a jewel of Federal-era craftsmanship. It makes no mention of the parlor's orientation. Thomas Ruggles died in 1820, 2 years after the house was completed. His personal papers, donated to the state in 1891, contain only one reference to the parlor. In a letter to his brother dated March of 1819, he wrote, "The east room is finished at last, though I confess it does not feel as I intended. The light enters strangely. I have asked Peterson if he deviated from the plans, but he insists he did not. Perhaps the fault lies in my own perception." He never mentioned the room again. Visitors still report the same sensation Harriet Bowman described in 1951, the feeling of being watched from a corner that shouldn't exist. Some say the air in the parlor feels heavier than in the rest of the house. Others say it simply feels wrong, like standing in a room that was built to face somewhere else entirely, somewhere that doesn't appear on any compass. somewhere that no blueprint ever intended. The Ruggles house still stands on Main Street in Columbia Falls, Maine. The parlor remains part of every tour, and the corner, the one that measures farther away than it should, has never been explained. Some names are written down so they won't be forgotten. Others are written down so they can be. The Washburn-Norlands Living History Center sits on 450 acres of rolling farmland in Livermore, Maine, about 40 miles northwest of Augusta. The property has been preserved as a working 19th century farm, complete with original outbuildings, livestock, and seasonal programs that allow visitors to experience life as it was lived in rural New England over 150 years ago. The centerpiece of the property is the Washburn family mansion, a stately Greek Revival home built in 1867. But there was a house on this land before the mansion, and that house kept records that the mansion has never been able to explain. The Washburn family was among the most prominent in Maine's history. 7 sons grew up on the Norlands property, and of those 7, 4 served in Congress, 1 became a governor, 1 became a foreign minister, and 1 became a Civil War general. Their story is one of ambition, public service, and meticulous documentation. The family kept records of everything: land transactions, correspondence, political appointments, and household expenses. Their archive fills dozens of boxes in the Maine State Library, which is why the Children's Registry is so unusual. The registry is a small leather-bound book, approximately 6 inches by 8 inches, with a worn brown cover and no title on the spine. It was discovered in 1931 during an inventory of items stored in the mansion's attic. Inside, written in faded iron gall ink, is a list of 14 names under the heading East Wing Residence 1847. Each name includes an estimated age ranging from 4 to 11 years old. The names are as follows: Samuel Trent, age 7, Clara Winship, age 9, Abner Howell, age 5, Mary Dennison, age 11, Frederick Lowe, age 8, Hannah Prescott, age 6, Josiah Marston, age 10, Abigail Snow, age 4, William Farnham, age 9, Ruth Greenleaf, age 7, Cyrus Osgood, age 11, Patience Woodbury, age 5, Ezra Coffin, age 8, Lydia Sprague, age 6. No other information is provided. No surnames match any known Washburn relatives. No further entries appear in the registry. The first attempt to trace the children's identities came in 1954, when a local historian named Bernard Plummer was commissioned to write a comprehensive history of the Washburn family. Plummer, who had spent 30 years researching genealogies in Androscoggin County, obtained permission to examine the registry as part of his research. He spent 4 months searching census records, church baptismal logs, and cemetery indexes throughout central Maine. He found nothing. I checked every available record from 1840 to 1855. Plummer wrote in a letter to the Historical Society dated September of 1954. There is no documentation of any child by these names living in Livermore or the surrounding towns during this period. No birth records, no death records, no school enrollments, no church memberships. It is as though these 14 children simply did not exist. Plummer's history of the Washburn family was published in 1956. It makes no mention of the Children's Registry. When contacted by a journalist in 1972, Plummer, then 81 years old, declined to discuss his research. "Some things are better left unwritten," he said. He died 3 years later without elaborating. The second genealogist to investigate the registry was a woman named Constance Farrar, a professional researcher who specialized in tracing orphan lineages for adoptees seeking biological family connections. In 1983, Farrar was hired by a documentary production company that was considering a film about the Washburn family. She spent 6 weeks at Norlands, examining not only the registry, but also the original foundation records of the earlier farmhouse that stood on the property before the mansion was built. Her findings were never shared with the production company. According to correspondence obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 2008, Farrar wrote to the Maine State Archivist on October 12, 1983, requesting access to any sealed or restricted documents pertaining to child welfare institutions in Androscoggin County prior to 1860. The archivist's response, dated October 19th, stated that no such documents existed in the state collection. Farrar terminated her contract with the documentary company on October 23rd. She returned her advance payment and cited personal reasons for her withdrawal. The documentary was never produced. In a 1991 interview with a local newspaper, Farrar was asked about her time at Norlands. "I found something I wasn't supposed to find," she said, "and then I found that it had already been found and ignored by people who knew better than I did." She declined to elaborate. The third genealogist was a graduate student named Theodore Barlow, who included the Children's Registry in his 2005 master's thesis on undocumented child labor in 19th century New England. Barlow approached the mystery from a different angle. Rather than searching for the children, he searched for the absence of them. His thesis, submitted to the University of Maine at Farmington, contains a chapter titled "The Norlands Anomaly." In it, Barlow notes that the 1850 federal census for Livermore lists the Washburn household as containing only family members and 2 domestic servants. No children outside the immediate family are recorded. The 1840 census shows the same, yet the registry clearly states that 14 children resided in the East Wing in 1847. If these children existed, Barlow wrote, they were deliberately excluded from official enumeration. If they did not exist, why were their names recorded with such specificity? Neither explanation is satisfactory. Barlow's thesis advisor, Dr. Helen Coughlin, later told colleagues that Barlow became increasingly agitated during his research. He requested a leave of absence in the spring of 2006, 3 months before his scheduled graduation. He never returned to complete his degree. When reached by email in 2014, Barlow responded with a single sentence: "I don't discuss Norlands." The physical registry itself presents additional questions. Handwriting analysis conducted in 1989 determined that the entries were written by at least 3 different hands, suggesting the document was compiled over time rather than in a single sitting. The ink, tested by a conservator at the Maine State Museum, was consistent with formulations used between 1830 and 1855. The leather binding, however, was dated to approximately 1870, more than 20 years after the entries were allegedly made. This suggests the pages were rebound at some point. No record of this rebinding exists in any Washburn family document. The East Wing mentioned in the registry no longer exists. The original Washburn farmhouse was demolished in 1865 to make way for the current mansion. No architectural plans for the earlier structure have survived. Photographs of the original farmhouse taken in the 1850s show a modest 2-story frame building with a central chimney. No east wing is visible in any of these images, yet the registry specifies East Wing residence. Staff at the Norlands Living History Center have been asked about the registry on numerous occasions. Official responses have remained consistent since at least 1978. The registry is considered an artifact of unknown provenance and is not included in any public tour or educational program. It remains stored in the mansion's archive room, accessible only to approved researchers. Approval requests, according to center records, have been denied 17 times since 2000. No grave markers bearing any of the 14 names have been found in any cemetery within 50 miles of Livermore. No baptismal records, no obituaries, no letters mentioning their existence. The children of the East Wing, if they ever lived at all, left no trace beyond the single leather-bound book that bears their names. Some researchers have speculated that the registry was a fabrication, a hoax created by a later owner or a creative family member. But no motive has ever been established, and the handwriting analysis confirmed that the entries predate the Civil War. Others have suggested the children were wards of the state, orphans placed with the Washburns, through informal arrangements common in rural communities before the establishment of formal child welfare systems. But such arrangements were typically recorded in church documents or personal correspondence. The Washburns, known for their exhaustive record-keeping, left no such documentation. The registry sits in its archival box, pages yellowed, ink fading. 14 names, 14 ages, 14 children who, according to every available record, never existed. And yet someone wrote them down. Someone wanted those names preserved. Or perhaps someone wanted to make certain they could never be traced. Nobra. The Washburn-Norland's Living History Center remains open to the public from July through October. The Children's Registry is not mentioned in any tour materials. Researchers who wish to examine it are advised to submit their requests in writing. Most requests, according to former staff, are never answered. Some patterns are meant to decorate walls. Others seem meant to be hidden behind them. The Victoria Mansion stands at the corner of Park and Danforth Streets in Portland, Maine, a brownstone Italianate villa that has remained virtually unchanged since its completion in 1860. It was built as a summer home for Ruggles Sylvester Morse, a New Orleans hotelier who spared no expense in its construction. The interiors feature original gas lighting fixtures, carved mahogany woodwork, and trompe-l'oeil murals painted by Italian artists brought to Maine specifically for the project. It is considered one of the most perfectly preserved pre-Civil War houses in America, but not everything inside the mansion has been preserved in plain sight. The house changed hands several times after Morse's death in 1893. In 1895, it was purchased by J.R. Libby, a Portland department store magnate who undertook a modest renovation to update certain rooms while maintaining the home's original character. Among the changes Libby commissioned was new wallpaper for the second-floor guest chambers, hand-painted paper imported from France, a luxury that even then cost more than most Portland families earned in a year. The commission was placed in February of 1889 with the firm of Zuber et Cie, a renowned wallpaper manufacturer based in Rixheim, Alsace. Zuber had been producing hand-blocked scenic wallpapers since 1810 and counted among its clients palaces, embassies, and the homes of European aristocracy. The order, according to shipping records preserved in the mansion's archive, specified 7 rolls of a pattern called Jardin d'été, summer garden, featuring climbing roses, wisteria, and songbirds against a pale cream background. The shipment arrived in Portland in May of 1889. The Customs Declaration, stamped at the Portland Port Authority, lists 7 rolls. The mansion's household inventory, updated that same month, lists 9. No explanation for the discrepancy has ever been found. The additional 2 rolls were not installed. According to a handwritten note in the margin of the inventory ledger, they were placed in storage in the mansion's 3rd-floor attic for future use. They remained there, undisturbed, for nearly a century. In 1971, the Victoria Mansion was opened to the public as a historic house museum following an extensive restoration effort. Volunteers cataloging the attic contents discovered the 2 surplus rolls wrapped in their original shipping paper, still sealed with Zuber et Cie's wax stamp. The discovery was noted in the Restoration Committee's minutes, but attracted little attention at the time. It was not until 1986 that anyone thought to examine the rolls closely. That year, a textile conservator named Marguerite Dolan was contracted to assess the condition of all fabric and paper elements in the mansion's collection. Dolan, who had worked on preservation projects at the Smithsonian and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, spent 3 weeks at the Victoria Mansion documenting wallpapers, draperies, and upholstery. Her report, submitted in November of 1986, runs to 214 pages. The section on the surplus wallpaper rolls occupies only 2 paragraphs, but those paragraphs have never been adequately explained. Rolls 8 and 9 do not match the Jardin d'été pattern, Dolan wrote. The background color is similar, but the design elements are entirely different. Rather than floral motifs, the paper displays a repeating geometric pattern consisting of interlocking hexagons, each containing what appears to be a stylized eye or aperture. I was unable to locate this pattern in any Zuber catalog or archive. Furthermore, the paper stock feels heavier than typical 19th century French wallpaper, and the colors have not faded despite nearly 100 years in storage. Dolan recommended that samples be sent to a laboratory for pigment analysis. Her recommendation was approved. The results, returned in March of 1987 from a conservation laboratory in Boston, raised more questions than they answered. The analysis identified the paper base as consistent with French manufacturing techniques of the 1880s. But the pigments used in the geometric pattern could not be matched to any known dye or paint formulation from the period. 2 of the colors, a deep blue-green and a muted ochre, contained chemical compounds that the laboratory chemist described as anomalous. The blue-green pigment contains trace amounts of a copper-based compound that does not correspond to any commercial colorant available before 1920, the report stated. The ochre contains synthetic binding agents that were not developed until the mid-20th century. Either the dating of this paper is incorrect, or the manufacturing process involved materials that were not documented in any known industrial record. The laboratory requested permission to conduct further testing. The Victoria Mansion's board of directors declined, citing concerns about potential damage to the artifacts. The surplus rolls were returned to storage. In 1994, a graduate student named Philip Achterberg from the Rhode Island School of Design requested access to the rolls as part of his dissertation on 19th century decorative arts. Achterberg spent 2 days examining and photographing the paper. His dissertation, completed in 1996, includes a brief mention of the Victoria Mansion wallpaper, but draws no conclusions about its origin. When contacted by a journalist in 2004, Achterberg declined to discuss his research in detail. "I photographed what I saw," he said. "The pattern is unlike anything I've encountered before or since. It's not Art Nouveau. It's not arts and crafts. It's not any recognizable movement. Frankly, I don't know what it is." He added, "The eyes, if that's what they are, seem to follow you. I know how that sounds, but I spent 2 days with that paper and I never got comfortable." The Zuber et archives in Rixheim were consulted in 2001 by a French researcher investigating the mansion's commission. The company's records confirmed the 1889 order for 7 rolls of Jardin d'été. No record of a 9-roll shipment exists. No record of the geometric eye pattern exists in any Zuber design catalog, sample book, or production log from any era. A company archivist, reached by telephone in 2009, stated that the pattern does not appear to be of Zuber origin and suggested it may have been added to the shipment by another party. When asked who might have done so and why, the archivist had no answer. The customs declaration remains on file at the Maine State Archives. It clearly states 7 rolls. The wax seal on the surplus rolls is authentic Zuber. The paper itself bears no manufacturer's mark other than a small symbol in the lower right corner of each sheet, a single vertical line bisected by 3 horizontal marks resembling a simplified ladder or gate. This symbol does not appear in any Zuber documentation. It does not appear in any known French, British, or American wallpaper manufacturer's catalog from the 19th century. current staff at the Victoria Mansion are aware of the surplus rolls but do not include them in public tours or educational materials. When asked about the wallpaper discrepancy, the mansion's director offered a standard response. Historic inventories sometimes contain clerical errors. We have no reason to believe the surplus rolls are anything other than a shipping anomaly. The rolls remain in climate-controlled storage on the third floor. They have not been unrolled or displayed since 1994. Marguerite Dolan, the conservator who first documented the anomaly, retired in 2002. In a 2011 interview for a preservation industry newsletter, she was asked if any project from her career still puzzled her. "The Portland wallpaper," she said. "I've worked with materials from 5 centuries. I've seen forgeries, misattributions, and honest mistakes. But I've never seen anything like those rolls. The pattern doesn't belong to any tradition I recognize. And those eyes," she paused. "I dream about them sometimes, not often, but when I do, they're always open." The interviewer asked what she meant. "I mean they're watching," Dolan said. "Even in the dream, they're watching." She declined further comment. The Victoria Mansion remains open for tours from May through October, with special holiday hours in December. The Jardin d'été wallpaper in the second-floor guest chambers is original to the 1889 installation. The 2 surplus rolls have never been displayed. Visitors who ask about them are told they are not part of the collection. The pattern has never been identified. The eyes have never been explained. The footsteps always stopped at the same place. The problem was that the stairs did not. Blaine House has served as the official residence of Maine's governors since 1919, when the state purchased the property from the family of James G. Blaine, a former U.S. Secretary of State and presidential candidate. The house sits at the corner of State and Capitol Streets in Augusta, directly across from the Maine State House. It is a handsome colonial revival structure built in 1833 with white clapboard siding, green shutters, and a columned portico that faces the Capitol Dome. For over a century, it has been the site of state dinners, policy meetings, and the private lives of Maine's first families. It has also, according to documents obtained from the Maine State Archives, contained a sealed staircase since 1921. The staircase in question was a narrow servants' passage connecting the basement kitchen to the second-floor hallway. Like many homes of its era, Blaine House was designed with separate circulation routes for staff, hidden stairs, back hallways, and service doors that allowed domestic workers to move through the residence without disturbing the family or their guests. The servants' staircase was tucked behind a door in the butler's pantry, rising steeply through the wall cavity before emerging near the upstairs linen closet. It was functional, unremarkable, and by all accounts, ordinary, until 1920. The first documented incident occurred on the night of March 7, 1920. A housekeeper named Della Moody, who had worked at Blaine House for 3 years under Governor Carl Milliken, reported to the household manager that she had been awakened at precisely 14 minutes past 3 in the morning by the sound of footsteps on the servants' staircase. Moody's room was located on the second floor, adjacent to the linen closet, where the staircase emerged. In her written statement, preserved in the governor's household files, Moody described the footsteps as slow and deliberate, like someone climbing who was in no hurry. She stated that she heard approximately 12 steps, consistent with the number of stairs in the passage, followed by a pause. Then, according to Moody, the footsteps continued. "They kept going up," she wrote, "but there is no up. The stairs end at the second floor. I heard at least 6 more steps, maybe 7, going somewhere above me. Then, nothing." Moody reported the incident to the household manager the following morning. She was told that old houses make strange sounds, that the wood expands and contracts with temperature changes, and that she should not trouble the governor's family with such matters. She accepted this explanation and did not report anything further. but she was not the last to hear the footsteps. On August 14, 1920, a second housekeeper named Ruth Ann Pelletier submitted a nearly identical report. Pelletier, who had been hired only 2 months earlier, stated that she had been awakened at approximately 3:15 by footsteps on the servants' staircase. Like Moody, she heard the steps ascend past the second-floor landing and continue upward. "I counted them," Pelletier wrote. 12 steps, then a pause, then 8 more. I got up and opened my door. The hallway was empty. The door to the staircase was closed. I checked the knob. It was locked from the inside. Pelletier's report was filed without comment. The third incident occurred on January 9, 1921, 5 days after Percival Baxter was inaugurated as Maine's 35th governor. The housekeeper who filed the report was named Harriet Vose, a woman who had worked in the household of Baxter's predecessor for less than a year. Her statement was brief. 3:14 in the morning, footsteps on the back stairs. They went up past where the stairs stop. I will not stay in this house. Vose resigned the following week. Her letter of resignation made no mention of the footsteps, citing only personal circumstances. Governor Baxter was a methodical man. He kept detailed journals throughout his life, documenting his daily activities, political decisions, and personal reflections in a collection that now spans over 40 volumes in the Maine State Library. His entries from January 1921 contain references to household staffing difficulties, budget discussions with the legislature, and his plans for land conservation in northern Maine. They contain no mention of footsteps, housekeepers, or the servants' staircase. What the archives do contain is a work order dated February 3, 1921, signed by Governor Baxter himself. The order authorized the permanent closure and sealing of the servants' staircase, effective immediately. The work was to be completed by the state's maintenance department, and the cost, $47 for materials and labor, was charged to the governor's discretionary household fund. The order provides no reason for the closure. Construction records indicate that the staircase was sealed from both ends. The basement entrance was covered with lath and plaster, then wallpapered to match the surrounding butler's pantry. The second-floor door was removed entirely, the frame filled with lumber, and the wall refinished so that no trace of the opening remained. A small notation in the maintenance log states that the interior of the staircase was filled with sand to the height of the first landing, before the openings were closed. No explanation for the sand has ever been provided. In 1968, a renovation project at Blaine House required the temporary removal of a section of wall in the butler's pantry. Workers discovered the sealed staircase entrance exactly as described in the 1921 records. The plaster was intact. The wallpaper, though yellowed, had never been disturbed. According to the project foreman, a man named Gilbert Sproul, the workers were instructed to leave the sealed area undisturbed and to rebuild the wall around it. "I asked why we couldn't just open it up," Sproul told a reporter in 1984. "More space, more ventilation, seemed like it would be useful." But the answer came back from the governor's office. Longley was governor then, that the staircase was to remain sealed. No discussion. Sproul said he pressed for a reason. He was told there wasn't one. The sealed staircase has remained undisturbed through 12 subsequent administrations. Renovation projects in 1982, 1995, and 2011 all included explicit instructions to preserve the sealed areas without investigation. No governor since Baxter has commented publicly on the staircase or its closure. In 2003, a historian named Frances Kimball submitted a Freedom of Information request for all documents related to the 1921 sealing. She received 14 pages of material, including the work order, the maintenance log, and the 3 housekeeper statements. She also received a single-page memorandum dated February 1, 1921, from Governor Baxter to his chief of staff. The memorandum read, in its entirety, The matter we discussed regarding the back staircase is to be resolved this week. No further reports are to be filed or retained. Please confirm when complete. The Chief of Staff's confirmation has never been located. Kimball published her findings in a 2005 article for the Maine Historical Society Quarterly. She noted that Baxter's journals from the relevant period showed no gaps or missing entries, yet contained no reference to the staircase, the housekeepers, or the decision to seal. This is unusual for a man who documented virtually every decision he made, Kimball wrote. The silence is, in itself, a kind of record. She concluded her article with a question she could not answer. What did Percival Baxter hear or learn that convinced him the only solution was to seal the staircase permanently and never speak of it again? Blaine House continues to serve as the governor's residence. Tours are offered during certain hours, and visitors can see the public rooms on the first floor. The butler's pantry is not included on the tour route. The sealed staircase remains behind the wall, filled with sand, closed at both ends, untouched for over a century. And somewhere in the space between the second floor and whatever lies above it, the footsteps, if they ever existed, have nowhere left to go. Or perhaps they do. Blaine House stands at 192 State Street in Augusta, Maine. The servants' staircase has not been opened since February of 1921. No current staff member has reported hearing footsteps at 14 minutes past 3 in the morning. But then again, no current staff member sleeps on the second floor. The camera captured what hadn't happened yet. No one has ever explained how. The Nichols Sortwell House stands on Main Street in Wiscasset, Maine, a town of approximately 3,000 residents that sits along the tidal waters of the Sheepscot River. The house is considered one of the finest examples of federal architecture in New England. A 3-story wooden mansion built in 1807 by Captain William Nichols, a shipping magnate whose fortune came from the lumber trade. The facade is symmetrical and elegant, with a grand entrance portico, twin chimneys, and a rooftop balustrade that once allowed the captain to watch his ships arrive from sea. The house has survived over 200 years of harsh Maine winters, changing ownership, and one significant fire. It is the fire, and a photograph taken decades before it occurred, that has quietly troubled historians since 1971. The fire broke out on the morning of February 17, 1903. According to newspaper accounts published in the Wiscasset Herald the following week, the blaze originated in the northwest corner of the house, likely caused by a faulty flue in the secondary chimney. The flames spread quickly through the upper floors before firefighters from the volunteer brigade could contain them. The roof was severely damaged, and the northwest chimney, the older of the 2 original chimneys, was left blackened and partially collapsed. The house was repaired over the following 18 months. The chimney was rebuilt using salvaged bricks from the original structure, and the roof was restored to its 1807 specifications. By 1905, the Nichols Sortwell House looked much as it had before the fire, and the incident faded from local memory. 68 years later, it resurfaced in an unexpected way. In 1971, the Maine Historical Society received a donation of photographic materials from the estate of Horace Wentworth, a Wiscasset photographer who had operated a studio on Water Street from 1852 until his death in 1891. The donation included approximately 300 glass plate negatives, most depicting portraits, local storefronts, and scenic views of the Sheepscot River Valley. Among them was a daguerreotype labeled, in Wentworth's handwriting, Nichols House, Main Street, 1858. The image shows the Nichols Sortwell House from the southeast, capturing the full facade and both chimneys against a pale sky. The detail is remarkable for the period. The texture of the clapboards is visible, as are the individual balusters of the rooftop railing. The photograph was likely taken in late afternoon, judging by the angle of the shadows. It was a cataloger named Esther Pendleton who first noticed the anomaly. Pendleton, who had worked in the Historical Society's archive department for 11 years, was preparing the Wentworth collection for storage when she examined the Nichols House plate under magnification. In her intake notes, dated April 14, 1971, she wrote, "Northwest chimney shows significant discoloration and apparent structural damage consistent with fire exposure. Brickwork appears blackened along the upper third. Roof line adjacent to chimney shows what may be charring or smoke residue." Pendleton cross-referenced the image with the Society's records on the Nichols Sortwell house. She found the 1903 fire documentation within minutes. Her follow-up note, written the same day, was brief. The fire occurred in 1903. This photograph is dated 1858. Please advise. The first authentication was conducted in 1972 by Dr. Leonard Hatch, a specialist in early American photography at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Hatch examined the glass plate, the chemical composition of the silver coating, and the stylistic characteristics of Wentworth's known work. His report, submitted in August of that year, confirmed that the daguerreotype was consistent with materials and techniques used in the late 1850s. He found no evidence of alteration, double exposure, or post-production manipulation. "The image is genuine," Hatch wrote. "The damage visible on the chimney appears to be an accurate representation of what the camera recorded at the time of exposure. I have no explanation for the apparent anachronism." A second authentication was conducted in 1984 by the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. Using electron microscopy, conservators examined the plate for signs of tampering, scratches, chemical additions, or areas where the image might have been modified after development. Their findings were consistent with Hatch's. The plate was unaltered, and the fire damage depicted on the chimney was part of the original exposure. The third authentication came in 2009, when the Maine Historical Society commissioned a digital analysis of the image using spectral imaging technology. The analysis, performed by a private conservation firm in Boston, confirmed that the discoloration on the chimney was not a flaw in the plate, a reflection, or an artifact of the development process. The scorch marks were real, or at least they had been recorded by the camera as real. The firm's report included a single paragraph that has never been officially addressed. The pattern of fire damage visible in the 1858 image corresponds with remarkable precision to the damage documented in post-fire photographs from 1903. The blackening occurs at the same height, extends to the same width, and affects the same rows of brickwork. Statistical analysis suggests the probability of this correspondence occurring by chance is less than 1 in 400,000. No institution has offered a theory to explain the correspondence. Local historians have approached the anomaly from several angles. Some have suggested that the 1858 photograph actually depicts an earlier, undocumented fire, one that damaged the chimney decades before the 1903 blaze. But a thorough review of Wiscasset Town records, insurance documents, and newspaper archives from 1840 through 1870 has revealed no mention of any fire at the Nichols property during that period. Others have proposed that the photograph was mislabeled, that it was actually taken after the 1903 fire and incorrectly attributed to 1858. But this theory is contradicted by the provenance of the Wentworth collection. Horace Wentworth died in 1891, 12 years before the fire occurred. The photograph could not have been taken by him after 1903. And the handwriting on the label has been confirmed as Wentworth's own, consistent with other dated materials in his archive. A third theory, proposed by a graduate student at Bowdoin College in 2015, suggested that the daguerreotype might have been deliberately fabricated as a hoax, perhaps by a family member or associate of Wentworth's, who had access to the collection after his death. But no motive for such a hoax has ever been established, and the technical skill required to create a convincing forgery using 1850s materials would have been extraordinary for the period. The graduate student, whose name was Jonathan Mercer, withdrew his thesis proposal 6 months after submitting it. His advisor told colleagues that Mercer had become frustrated by the lack of rational explanations and had chosen to pursue a different topic. The original glass plate remains in the Maine Historical Society's climate-controlled archive in Portland. It is not on public display. Researchers who wish to examine it must submit a written request and demonstrate a legitimate scholarly purpose. According to archive staff, requests to view the Wentworth daguerreotype have been submitted 43 times since 1971. 31 of those requests have been approved. Of the researchers who examined the plate, only 4 have published any findings. The others, according to follow-up correspondence in the Society's files, either abandoned their research or declined to comment. One researcher, a retired physics professor from Colby College named Arthur Gilman, visited the archive in 2003, exactly 100 years after the fire. His examination lasted approximately 90 minutes. In a letter to the Society dated 2 weeks later, Gilman wrote, "I came hoping to find evidence of fraud or error. I found neither. The photograph shows what it shows. I do not know what to do with this information, and I suspect no one else does either." The Nichols Sortwell House is now owned by Historic New England and is open for tours from June through October. The northwest chimney, rebuilt after the 1903 fire, stands exactly where the original chimney stood. Visitors can see it from Main Street, rising above the roofline, just as it appears in Horace Wentworth's photograph. The chimney that burned 45 years after it was photographed burning. The damage that appeared in an image before it existed in the world. The daguerreotype remains in storage, labeled in faded ink, Nichols House, Main Street, 1858. The fire it depicts would not occur for another 4.5 decades. No one has ever explained how Horace Wentworth's camera saw what hadn't happened yet. Perhaps no one ever will. The census was designed to count the living. No one has explained why it counted someone who couldn't have been there. The Tate House stands on Westbrook Street in the Stroudwater neighborhood of Portland, Maine, overlooking the tidal flats where the Fore River meets Casco Bay. Built in 1755 for Captain George Tate, the senior mast agent for the British Royal Navy, the house is one of the oldest surviving structures in the Portland area and the only pre-revolutionary mast agent's house remaining in the United States. Its gambrel roof, central chimney, and unusual indigo-painted exterior have made it a landmark of colonial architecture for nearly 3 centuries. The house was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1970. But long before that designation, it had already attracted a different kind of attention that began with a single line in a federal census ledger and has never been satisfactorily resolved. The United States Census of 1870 was conducted between June 1st and August 23rd of that year. Enumerators, the official title for census takers, were assigned specific districts and given detailed instructions on how to record the inhabitants of each dwelling. They were to list every person residing in a household on the night of June 1st, including their name, age, sex, race, occupation, and place of birth. The process was methodical, bureaucratic, and designed to leave no resident uncounted. The enumerator assigned to the Stroudwater district in 1870 was a man named Clement Woodbury. Woodbury was 34 years old, a former schoolteacher who had taken the temporary census position to supplement his income during a period of financial difficulty. His field notes, preserved in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., show him to have been thorough and precise. His handwriting is neat, his entries consistent, his margin notes minimal, with one exception. On June 14, 1870, Woodbury visited the Tate House to enumerate its residents. At the time, the property was owned by the Strout family, who had purchased it in 1848. According to Woodbury's official submission, the household contained 5 individuals: Marcus Strout, age 52, farmer; his wife Patience, age 49; their son Edwin, age 19, laborer; a domestic servant named Bridget Connolly, age 23, and a final entry that has puzzled researchers for over a century. The 5th entry reads, H. Warden, age unknown, sex unknown, race unknown, occupation, waiting, birthplace unknown. The location field for this entry, which enumerators use to specify where within a dwelling each person resided, contains 2 words: 3rd floor. The problem is that the 3rd floor of the Tate House had been inaccessible for 18 years. In 1852, a severe nor'easter struck the Maine coast, causing extensive damage throughout the Portland area. The Tate House, already over a century old, suffered a partial collapse of its upper structure. The 3rd floor joists gave way, and the ceiling of the 2nd floor buckled inward. The damage was severe enough that the Strout family, who had owned the property for only 4 years, made the decision to seal the 3rd floor entirely rather than undertake the expensive repairs. Contemporary accounts confirm this decision. A letter from Marcus Strout to his brother, dated November of 1852, describes the situation. The upper story is lost to us now. The beams are rotted through and the floor is unsafe for any weight. We have nailed the hatch shut and will make do with the rooms below. The hatch remained nailed shut for decades. Photographs of the house from 1865 and 1868 show no external evidence of repair or access to the upper level. Insurance documents from 1857 list the dwelling as 2 stories, 3rd floor condemned and sealed. Yet Clement Woodbury recorded a resident on that floor in 1870. His field notes, separate from the official census forms, provide the only additional context. Most of Woodbury's notes are mundane, reminders to return to certain addresses, questions about spelling, occasional comments on the condition of roads or the temperament of dogs. But the entry for the Tate House contains a single line that has never been explained. Below the address, in slightly smaller handwriting than the rest of his notes, Woodbury wrote, "Counted as instructed." No other entry in Woodbury's 1870 field notes contains this phrase. No census guidelines from the period mention any special instructions for counting inaccessible areas. No correspondence between Woodbury and his supervisors references the Tate House or any unusual circumstances encountered during his rounds. The phrase stands alone, unexplained, as if answering a question no one remembers asking. In 1938, a historian named Dorothy Fernald attempted to trace the identity of H. Warden. Fernald, who was compiling a comprehensive record of Portland's pre-Civil War residents, spent 3 months searching city directories, church records, ship manifests, and cemetery indexes for any person matching the name and description. She found nothing. "There is no H. Warden in any Portland record I have examined," Fernald wrote in a letter to the Maine Historical Society, dated September of 1938. No warden of any initial appears in the Stroudwater area between 1840 and 1880. The name seems to have existed only in the census and nowhere else. Fernald's letter also notes that she contacted the Strout family's descendants to inquire about the census entry. The response she received from a granddaughter of Edwin Strout, named Alice Strout Margison, was brief. "We do not discuss the 3rd floor." No further correspondence between Fernald and the Strout family has been preserved. The Tate House was donated to the Colonial Dames of America in 1950 and opened to the public as a museum in 1954. As part of the restoration process, contractors finally accessed the third floor for the first time in over a century. Their report, filed with the National Park Service in 1953, describes the space as they found it. Third floor severely deteriorated. Original flooring largely collapsed into second-floor ceiling cavity. Exposed joists show extensive rot and insect damage consistent with prolonged moisture exposure. No furnishings or personal effects present. Space appears to have been uninhabited for an extended period. The report makes no mention of any evidence suggesting prior occupancy. No bed frames, no clothing, no personal items of any kind. Yet the floor was not entirely empty. In the northwest corner of the third floor, where the roof slope met the knee wall, workers discovered a small area of floorboards that had remained intact. On these boards, according to the restoration report, someone had scratched a series of marks into the wood. The marks were described as tally-like, approximately 400 in number, arranged in groups of 7, 400 marks, grouped in sevens, 57 weeks, just over 1 year of waiting. The marks were photographed but not preserved. During the restoration, the damaged flooring, including the section with the tally marks, was removed and replaced. The photographs, according to National Park Service records, were filed with the restoration documentation, but have not been located since 1971. The 1870 census remains the only official record of H. Warden's existence. The occupation listed, waiting, appears in no other census entry from any state in that year. Census guidelines from the period instructed enumerators to record occupations as specifically as possible, using standardized categories when available. Waiting was not a standardized category. Clement Woodbury completed his enumeration duties in August of 1870 and returned to teaching that fall. He died in 1894 at the age of 58. His personal papers, donated to the Maine Historical Society by his daughter in 1912, contain no reference to the Tate House, H. Warden, or the instructions he claimed to have followed. The Tate House remains open to the public from June through October. Tours include the first and second floors, along with the restored 18th century herb garden. The third floor, now structurally sound, is used for storage and is not accessible to visitors. Staff members occasionally receive questions about H. Warden. The official response, according to the museum's docent handbook, is that the census entry is a clerical error of unknown origin. But clerical errors do not come with instructions, and they do not wait. The 1870 census ledger is preserved in the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. The entry for H. Warden remains on page 47 of the Portland Enumeration District records, written in Clement Woodbury's careful hand. Occupation, waiting. Location, third floor, counted as instructed. The mirrors were positioned to look at something. After more than a century, no one has determined what. Whitehall Inn sits on High Street in Camden, Maine, a picturesque harbor town where the Magunticook River meets Penobscot Bay. The building is a rambling white clapboard structure, part colonial farmhouse, part Victorian expansion, surrounded by towering maples and views of the Camden Hills. Since 1901, it has operated continuously as an inn, welcoming guests who come to sail the bay, hike Mount Batty, or simply escape the noise of larger cities. The inn is perhaps best known as the place where poet Edna St. Vincent Millay first recited Renaissance in 1912, launching her literary career. But among a smaller circle of researchers, surveyors, mathematicians, and a handful of local historians, Whitehall is known for something else entirely. It is known for its mirrors. The inn contains 14 antique mirrors, all installed during a renovation completed in 1901. The mirrors vary in size and style. Some are ornate Victorian pieces with gilded frames. Others are simpler Federal-era designs acquired from estate sales throughout New England. They are distributed throughout the building's public rooms and hallways, positioned at heights and angles that appear, at first glance, decorative. They are not decorative. In 1978, a surveyor named Franklin Morse was hired to prepare updated floor plans of the inn for a proposed expansion project. Morse, who operated a small firm in Rockport, spent 3 days measuring the building's interior, documenting walls, doorways, and structural elements with the precision his profession required. On the second day, Morse noticed something unusual about the mirrors. They weren't hanging straight, he later explained in a 1992 interview with a Camden historical newsletter. At first, I thought they were just crooked. Old building, settling foundations, that sort of thing. But when I measured them, I realized they were all tilted at specific angles, very specific, down to the fraction of a degree. Morse recorded the orientation of each mirror as part of his survey, more out of curiosity than professional necessity. When he returned to his office and plotted the angles on a topographic map, he discovered that the mirrors were not randomly positioned. They were aimed. Each of the 14 mirrors, when its angle of reflection was extended outward from the inn, formed a line pointing toward the Camden Hills, and all 14 lines converged at a single point, a location approximately 2.5 miles northwest of the inn in a heavily wooded area on the western slope of Ragged Mountain. Morse included this finding in a footnote to his survey report. The expansion project was eventually canceled due to budget concerns, and his report was filed with the inn's records, where it remained unexamined for nearly 2 decades. In 1996, a mathematics professor from the University of Maine named Dr. Ingrid Solberg came across Morse's survey while researching geometric patterns in 19th century architecture. Solberg, whose specialty was spatial mathematics, was intrigued by the precision of the mirror alignments. She contacted Morse, who was by then retired, and obtained permission to conduct her own measurements. Her findings confirmed Morse's observations and extended them. "The angles aren't just convergent," Solberg wrote in an unpublished paper dated March of 1997. "They're complementary. Each mirror is positioned so that its reflection, if extended infinitely, would intersect with the reflections of at least 2 other mirrors before reaching the convergence point. The pattern forms a series of interlocking triangles, like a geodesic framework, all focused on a single location." Solberg calculated the coordinates of the convergence point, approximately 44.2187 degrees north latitude, 69.0842 degrees west longitude. She cross-referenced this location with geological surveys, property records, and historical maps dating back to the 18th century. She found nothing. The convergence point lies in undeveloped forest land, owned since 1923 by a timber company that has never harvested the parcel. No structures have ever been built there. No roads pass within half a mile. No historical events of any significance have been recorded at or near the location. It is, by every available measure, an empty spot in the woods. In the summer of 1997, Solberg organized a small expedition to visit the convergence point. She was accompanied by 2 graduate students and a local hiking guide named Walter Prescott, who had spent 30 years leading trips through the Camden Hills. The group set out from the Ragged Mountain trailhead on the morning of July 12th. According to Solberg's field notes, the hike proceeded normally for the first hour. The terrain was steep but manageable, the forest dense with spruce and birch. By mid-morning, they had reached a point approximately 100 yards from the calculated coordinates. Then their equipment began to fail. "The GPS unit stopped responding first," Solberg wrote. "It didn't lose signal. It simply displayed coordinates that couldn't be correct. It showed us several miles south of our actual position, then several miles north, then somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. I switched to a backup unit. Same result." Prescott, the guide, reported that his compass had begun spinning erratically at roughly the same distance from the convergence point. "I've been hiking these hills since 1967, he told a reporter in 2003. "I've never seen a compass behave like that. It wasn't just fluctuating, it was spinning, like it couldn't decide which way was north." The group attempted to proceed without instruments, using visual landmarks to navigate. But according to Solberg's notes, the forest became increasingly disorienting as they approached the coordinates. Trees that should have been ahead of them appeared to their left. A stream they had crossed earlier seemed to reappear in front of them, running in the opposite direction. After approximately 40 minutes of confusion, Solberg made the decision to turn back. The group returned to the trailhead without further incident. Their equipment resumed normal function within 10 minutes of leaving the area. Solberg never published her findings. In 2001, she accepted a position at a university in Sweden and discontinued her research on the Whitehall mirrors. When contacted by email in 2016, she declined to comment on her 1997 expedition, stating only that she had moved on to other projects. The mirrors themselves remain in place at Whitehall Inn. According to current staff, they have never been moved or adjusted since the 1901 renovation. The frames have been cleaned and restored over the years, but the angles, the precise, deliberate angles documented by Franklin Morse, have been preserved. Attempts to determine who positioned the mirrors have been unsuccessful. The 1901 renovation was overseen by a contractor named Silas Thorndike, whose business records were destroyed in a warehouse fire in 1919. No correspondence survives between Thorndike and the inn's owners regarding the installation. No invoices, no design specifications, no instructions of any kind. The mirrors simply appeared, angled with mathematical precision toward a point in the hills where nothing exists, or where nothing has been found. In 2009, a retired electrical engineer named Donald Hubbard attempted to reach the convergence point using only analog instruments, a mechanical compass, a paper map, and a handheld altimeter. He documented his attempt in a detailed blog post that was later removed from the internet. According to archived copies, Hubbard experienced the same equipment failures reported by Solberg's team despite using devices with no electronic components. "The compass didn't just malfunction," Hubbard wrote. "It pointed somewhere. Consistently, insistently, it pointed at something that wasn't north, as if there was a stronger pull coming from another direction entirely." Hubbard estimated that he came within 30 yards of the convergence point before abandoning his attempt. He reported no unusual visual phenomena, no sounds, no physical sensations, only the persistent failure of every instrument he carried. His final entry read, "I don't know what's there, but something is, something the mirrors have been looking at for over 100 years. The Whitehall Inn continues to operate as it has since 1901. Guests sleep beneath the antique mirrors, their reflections angled toward the hills, unaware of the geometry that surrounds them. The convergence point remains unvisited and undocumented, and the mirrors continue to watch." Whitehall Inn is located at 52 High Street in Camden, Maine. The 14 antique mirrors remain in their original positions, tilted at angles that have never been explained. The coordinates they point toward, 44.2187 north, 69.0842 west, appear on no map of significance. But then again, some things are not meant to be mapped. 43 people wrote 43 letters. Every one of them stopped at the same word. None of them ever explained why. Castle Tucker stands at the crest of Lee Street in Wiscasset, Maine, overlooking the Sheepscot River and the quiet downtown that once served as the busiest port north of Boston. The house is an eccentric Victorian landmark, built in 1807 and dramatically remodeled in 1860 by Richard Tucker, a sea captain's son who transformed the original federal structure into an Italianate fantasy of piazzas, elliptical windows, and freestanding spiral staircases. The interior remains largely unchanged since the Tucker family's occupancy. Faded wallpaper, original furnishings, and the peculiar stillness of a house that time has chosen to forget. The house was donated to Historic New England in 1997. It was during the subsequent restoration process, in the summer of 1999, that workers discovered the letters. They were hidden inside a wall cavity on the second floor, in a space between the plaster and the exterior sheathing that should not have been accessible without deliberate modification. The opening, concealed behind a section of decorative molding, measured approximately 18 inches wide and 12 inches deep, just large enough to hold the wooden box that had been placed inside. The box was made of unfinished pine, with no hinges, no lock, and no markings of any kind. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them remarkably well, were 43 sheets of paper. Each sheet contained a handwritten letter. Each letter was dated sometime between January and November of 1864. Each letter ended with the same word: returning. The letters were examined by a team of conservators from Historic New England's Boston office. Their preliminary report, completed in October of 1999, documented the basic facts. The paper was consistent with stationery available in mid-19th century Maine. The ink was iron gall, typical of the period. The handwriting represented at least 43 distinct individuals, based on variations in letter formation, slant, and pressure. None of the letters were addressed. None bore any postage marks. None had been folded for insertion into an envelope. They appeared to have been written, stopped, and placed directly into the box without any intention of being sent. The content of the letters varied widely. Some were personal, mentions of family members, daily activities, weather conditions. Others were more formal, discussing business arrangements or community matters. A few were intimate, suggesting romantic correspondence. But regardless of tone, subject, or apparent recipient, every letter shared the same characteristic. Each one ended mid-sentence at the word returning. The first letter, dated January 12, 1864, was written by someone who signed only as E.H. It read, in part, "I have given much thought to your request and find myself unable to provide the answer you seek. The situation here grows more complicated with each passing week, and I fear that by the time you receive this, I will already be returning." The sentence stops there. No period, no continuation on the reverse side of the page, simply the word returning, followed by blank space. The 17th letter, dated April 3rd, was signed by a woman named Constance Varney. Her letter discussed the price of wool, the health of her sister in Bath, and her plans for the spring planting. It concluded, "I expect the shipment will arrive before the end of the month, though Mr. Phelps has warned me that the roads remain difficult. Please tell Mother that I am well and that I think of her often, especially now that Father is returning." Again, the sentence ends without completion. Again, the word returning stands alone at the edge of meaning. Dr. Maureen Aldrich, a linguist from Bowdoin College who examined the letters in 2004, noted that the final sentences were not merely incomplete, they were grammatically incoherent. In most cases, the word returning doesn't fit the sentence structure that precedes it, Aldrich wrote in her analysis. The writers appear to have been composing normal, coherent thoughts, and then, abruptly, the word returning appears, regardless of whether it makes syntactic sense. It's as if the word was not chosen by the writers at all, but inserted from outside the flow of their composition. Aldrich cited the 31st letter as an example. Written by a man named Solomon Bartlett and dated August 19th, it discussed his recent purchase of a fishing vessel. The final sentence read, "The hull requires additional work before she will be seaworthy, and I have engaged the Hodgdon brothers to complete the necessary returning." "Returning what?" Aldrich asked in her paper. "The sentence requires a noun, repairs, perhaps, or modifications. But instead we get returning, a word that functions as a verb or gerund and cannot grammatically complete the thought. It's not a mistake, it's an interruption. Attempts to identify the 43 letter writers have met with limited success. Of the names that appear, those who signed their letters rather than using initials, approximately half can be matched to individuals living in Wiscasset or surrounding towns during the 1860s. But no pattern connects them. They represent different ages, occupations, and social circles. Some were prosperous merchants, others were laborers or domestic servants, some were lifelong residents, others were recent arrivals. The only commonality, aside from the letters themselves, is that none of the identifiable writers appear in any Wiscasset record after November of 1864. This absence was first noted by a genealogist named Harold Finch, who was hired by Historic New England in 2001 to research the provenance of the letter collection. Finch spent 8 months tracing the names through census records, church registries, land transactions, and newspaper archives. His final report, submitted in September of 2001, contained a troubling observation. Of the 19 letter writers I was able to positively identify, Finch wrote, not one appears in any document dated after 1864. No death records, no burial entries, no probate filings, no mentions in correspondence. They simply cease to exist in the historical record as if they had never been. Finch acknowledged that record-keeping in Civil War-era Maine was inconsistent and that gaps in documentation were not unusual. But the complete absence of 19 individuals from all subsequent records struck him as statistically improbable. People leave traces, he wrote, even those who die young or move away. These 19 left nothing. It's as if November of 1864 was the end of their story, the last chapter, with no epilogue. The wall cavity where the letters were found presents its own mysteries. According to architectural historians who examined the site, the opening was not part of the original construction. It was created deliberately sometime after the 1860 remodeling by removing a section of lath and plaster and then carefully concealing the gap behind decorative molding. The work was skilled. Whoever created the hiding place knew what they were doing. But no record exists of the modification. The Tucker family papers, preserved in the Maine State Archives, contain detailed accounts of household repairs, renovations, and improvements spanning from 1860 to 1923. None mention the wall cavity or any work on the second-floor molding. Richard Tucker himself died in 1875. His wife, Molly, lived in the house until her death in 1908. Their daughter, Jane Tucker, remained until her death in 1971 at the age of 102. None of them, in any surviving letter, diary, or interview, ever mentioned the hidden box or its contents. It is possible they never knew it was there. It is also possible they knew and chose never to speak of it. The letters remain in the collection of Historic New England, stored in acid-free folders in a climate-controlled facility in Haverhill, Massachusetts. They are not on display. Researchers who wish to examine them must submit a detailed request explaining the purpose of their inquiry. According to archive staff, most requests are approved. But few researchers return for a second visit. One who did, a doctoral student from Harvard named Ellen Yoshida, spent 3 days with the collection in 2012. She was preparing a dissertation on epistolary practices in Civil War-era New England. She never completed it. In a 2015 interview with a Boston literary magazine, Yoshida explained her decision to abandon the project. "I couldn't stop thinking about the word," she said. Returning. What were they returning to, or what was returning to them? The more I studied those letters, the more I felt like I was looking at the edge of something, a threshold, and everyone who wrote those letters had stepped up to it and stopped. She paused before adding, or been stopped. The 43 letters remain, unfinished, unsigned by completion, and somewhere in each of them the word waits, patient, unexplained, pointing toward something that never arrived, or perhaps something that never left. Castle Tucker is open to the public from June through October. Tours include the first and second floors, but do not mention the wall cavity or the letters it contained. The collection remains in storage, 43 voices frozen in mid-sentence, all of them reaching toward the same word, all of them waiting to finish what they started, returning. He built an observatory to watch for ships. The telescope pointed away from the sea. The Schofield-Whittier House stands on Park Row in Brunswick, Maine, facing the town green and the graceful spires of the First Parish Church. It is a handsome Italianate dwelling, built in 1858 by Captain George Schofield, one of the most successful shipbuilders in a town that once launched more vessels than nearly any port in New England. The house is a monument to prosperity, high ceilings, marble fireplaces, ornate plasterwork, but its most distinctive feature sits above the roofline, almost invisible from the street below. The observatory. A small cupola crowns the house, accessible by a narrow staircase from the third floor. It was added in 1861, 3 years after the main structure was completed. According to family tradition, Captain Schofield built it to watch for his ships as they returned from voyages to South America, the Caribbean, and ports along the Atlantic seaboard. From the cupola, he could supposedly see Maquoit Bay, some 5 miles to the southeast, where incoming vessels would pass before continuing up the New Meadows River to the Schofield shipyard. The tradition makes sense. The explanation is logical. The only problem is that it isn't true. The telescope mounted in the observatory, a brass refractor manufactured by Alvin Clark and Sons of Cambridge, Massachusetts, is still in place, preserved exactly as Captain Schofield left it. It is bolted to a wooden pedestal that was built into the floor of the cupola, fixed at a specific angle that has not been altered since installation. The telescope does not point toward Maquoit Bay. It does not point toward the sea at all. In 1984, the Pagepscott Historical Society, which administers the Schofield-Whittier House as a museum, commissioned a survey of the property's architectural features. As part of this survey, a local astronomer named Philip Gascoigne was invited to examine the observatory equipment and determine its original purpose. Gascoigne's report, submitted in November of that year, contained an unexpected finding. The telescope is aimed at a bearing of approximately 312 degrees, roughly northwest, Gascoigne wrote. At the fixed elevation of the instrument, this line of sight passes over the inland hills of Brunswick and terminates somewhere in the forested region between Durham and Lisbon. There is no water visible along this bearing, no roads of significance, no structures, historical or contemporary, that would warrant sustained observation. Gascoigne attempted to identify what Captain Schofield might have been watching. He consulted 19th century maps, land records, and geological surveys. He found nothing. The telescope points at an empty stretch of forest, he concluded. It has pointed there for over 120 years. I have no explanation for this. The discovery might have remained a minor curiosity had it not been for the logbooks. Captain Schofield kept meticulous records throughout his life. His business ledgers, preserved in the Maine Maritime Museum in Bath, document every ship he built, every voyage he financed, every transaction he conducted. His personal correspondence fills 3 archival boxes. He was, by all accounts, a man who believed in documentation. The observatory logbooks were found in the cupola itself, in a small cabinet beneath the telescope mount. There were 7 of them, leather-bound volumes covering the period from 1861 to 1879, the year of Schofield's death. Each volume contained dated entries recording observations made from the observatory, typically between the hours of 9 in the evening and 2 in the morning. The entries were sparse, rarely more than a line or two, but they followed a consistent pattern. A typical entry from October 14, 1863 read, "Clear skies, arrival at 11:42, departure at 12:17, duration 35 minutes." Another from March 8, 1869. "Overcast, partial clearing after midnight, arrival at 1:03, no departure observed, duration unknown." And another from July 22, 1874. "Excellent visibility, 3 arrivals between 10 and midnight. 1 departure at 12:51, unusual activity." Over 18 years of observation, Captain Schofield recorded more than 2,000 arrivals and nearly as many departures. He noted weather conditions, visibility, and precise timestamps. He occasionally commented on the duration or frequency of what he observed. He never once specified what was arriving or departing. The logbooks contain no references to ships, lights, signals, or any identifiable phenomenon. The entries are clinical, detached, almost mechanical, as if Schofield were recording data whose meaning was self-evident to him and required no elaboration. Dr. Rosemary Pendleton, a historian specializing in 19th century maritime culture, examined the logbooks in 2002. Her analysis, published in the Maine Historical Society Quarterly, raised more questions than it answered. "The language is deliberately vague," Pendleton wrote. "Captain Schofield was a precise man in all other aspects of his record-keeping. His ship manifests specify cargo weights to the pound, his financial ledgers balanced to the penny, yet these observatory logs read almost like a code, a private notation system whose key has been lost." Pendleton noted that the pattern of observations did not correspond to any known maritime activity. The arrivals and departures occurred at all hours, in all seasons, regardless of tides, shipping schedules, or weather conditions that would have affected coastal traffic. "If he were watching ships," she wrote, "the entries would cluster around high tide, favorable winds, or daylight hours. They don't. The observations appear random, or rather, they appear to follow a pattern that has nothing to do with the sea." Local attempts to identify the telescope's target have produced no results. In 1991, a group of amateur astronomers from Bowdoin College used the observatory's coordinates to triangulate the telescope's line of sight. They determined that it pointed toward a location approximately 6 miles northwest of Brunswick, in an undeveloped section of woodland between Durham and Lisbon Falls. A subsequent hiking expedition to the area found nothing unusual, no clearings, no ruins, no evidence of historical activity. The forest was dense, unremarkable, and showed no signs of having ever been anything other than what it appeared to be. One member of the expedition, a graduate student named Thomas Vining, later submitted a brief report to the Historical Society. "We found nothing at the coordinates," he wrote, "but I will note that our compasses behaved erratically in the area, and one member of our group experienced a persistent feeling of being watched. I include this only for completeness." The final entry in Captain Schofield's observatory logbooks is dated September 3, 1879, 12 days before his death. It reads, "Clear and cold, arrival at 11:11, duration extended, they are not leaving, I understand now." No subsequent entries appear. Schofield died on September 15, 1879, at the age of 68. His obituary in the Brunswick Telegraph described him as a pillar of the community, a master shipbuilder, and a devoted observer of the night sky. It made no mention of what he observed. His widow, Eugenia, lived in the house until her death in 1897. According to family correspondence, she never entered the observatory after her husband's passing. The door to the cupola staircase was kept locked, and the key was placed in a drawer of Schofield's desk, where it remained until the house was converted to a museum in 1982. The telescope has not been moved, the logbooks have not been explained. The forest to the northwest remains empty of any feature that would warrant 18 years of nightly observation. In 2015, a documentary filmmaker named Sarah Lindquist requested permission to spend a night in the observatory, hoping to recreate Schofield's observations for a project on 19th-century eccentrics. Her request was approved by the Historical Society. Lindquist arrived at the museum at 9 in the evening on October 7th and ascended to the cupola alone. She brought a video camera, an audio recorder, and a notebook. She planned to observe through the original telescope and document whatever she saw. Her footage, portions of which were later shared with the Historical Society, shows approximately 4 hours of uneventful observation: darkness, occasional passing clouds, the distant lights of Lisbon Falls on the horizon. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, Lindquist can be heard on the audio recording saying, "There's nothing here. I don't know what he was." The sentence stops. The recording continues for another 47 minutes, capturing only the sound of Lindquist's breathing and the occasional creak of the old house settling in the night. In her written notes, submitted to the Historical Society the following week, Lindquist described the remainder of her observation in a single paragraph. At approximately 1:32 a.m., I observed through the telescope a momentary illumination in the area of the forest to the northwest. It was not a light in the conventional sense, not a flashlight, not a fire, not headlights. It was more like an absence of darkness, a brief interval during which a section of the forest was simply less dark than it should have been. The illumination lasted approximately 90 seconds. I observed no movement. I heard no sound. When it ended, the darkness returned, and I felt a strong and irrational urge to leave the observatory immediately. I did so. Lindquist's documentary was never completed. She declined further comment on her experience. The Schofield-Whittier House remains open for tours from June through October. The observatory is occasionally included on special behind-the-scenes visits, though the telescope is no longer accessible to visitors. It remains bolted to its pedestal, aimed at a patch of forest where nothing has ever been documented, waiting for arrivals that no one else has ever seen. Captain Schofield's logbooks are preserved in the archives of the Pejepscot Historical Society. The final entry, written 12 days before his death, remains the only indication he ever understood what he was watching. "They are not leaving," he wrote. "I understand now." He never shared that understanding with anyone. Perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps some things, once seen, can only be recorded, never explained. Every room in the house collects dust. Every room except one. No one has cleaned it in over a century, and no one can explain why it doesn't need cleaning. The Farnsworth homestead sits on Elm Street in Rockland, Maine, a modest coastal city where the fishing industry once dominated, and the smell of salt still carries through the downtown streets. The house is a handsome Greek Revival structure built in 1850 and expanded in the 1880s, with tall windows, a wraparound porch, and the quiet dignity of a home that has outlived the family that built it. It stands adjacent to the Farnsworth Art Museum, which was founded from the estate of Lucy Farnsworth, the last surviving member of the family who died in 1935 at the age of 96. Lucy Farnsworth was famously reclusive. For the final decades of her life, she rarely left the house, living in near total isolation with only a handful of caretakers and a lawyer who managed her considerable finances. She never married, never entertained visitors, and never explained the precise terms under which her estate would eventually be used. Among those terms, buried in the legal paperwork that established the museum, was a single reference to the music room. The music room occupies the southwest corner of the first floor. It is a modest space, perhaps 15 feet by 18, with high ceilings, elaborate crown molding, and a bay window that overlooks the side garden. A Victorian-era piano sits against the interior wall, its keys yellowed but intact. 2 upholstered chairs face the window, positioned as if awaiting guests who never arrived. A marble-top table holds a metronome and a small collection of sheet music, arranged neatly beneath a portrait of a woman whose identity has never been confirmed. The room has not been cleaned since at least 1935. This fact was first documented in 1952, when the Farnsworth Art Museum hired a professional cleaning service to prepare the homestead for public tours. According to records preserved in the museum's administrative files, the service was contracted to clean all rooms of the house, including the music room. The crew arrived on March 15, 1952. They completed their work in every room except one. In a letter to the museum's director dated March 18th, the cleaning supervisor, a woman named Evelyn Grindle, explained the situation. Upon entering the music room, my crew and I observed that the surfaces were already clean. The piano, the furniture, the windowsills, the floors, all were free of dust. We checked our equipment and returned the following day to confirm. The room requires no cleaning. We have therefore excluded it from our invoice. The museum's director at the time, a man named Howard Collins, noted Grindle's observation in his files, but did not pursue the matter further. The homestead opened for tours in 1953, and the music room was included on the standard route. It was not until 1971 that the anomaly attracted serious attention. A caretaker named Dorothy Simmons, who had worked at the homestead since 1963, submitted a formal report to the museum's board of directors in November of that year. Simmons, who was responsible for the daily maintenance of the property, had grown increasingly troubled by the music room. "I have cleaned this house for 8 years," Simmons wrote. "Every room accumulates dust. The parlor, the bedrooms, the hallways, the kitchen. Every room except the music room. I have tested this repeatedly. I have left objects on surfaces to see if dust collects. It does not. I have closed the windows and sealed the door. Still, the room remains clean. I do not understand how this is possible, and I am requesting guidance from the board." The board's response, preserved in the museum's archives, was brief. "Continue standard maintenance procedures for all other rooms. The music room is to be left as is, per the terms of the original bequest." Simmons requested clarification on what those terms specified. She was told that the relevant documents were held by the estate's legal representative and were not available for staff review. Dorothy Simmons retired in 1984. Her successor, a man named Bernard Oakes, encountered the same phenomenon and submitted a nearly identical report in 1989. He, too, was told that the music room was subject to terms specified in the original bequest and that no further action was required. The reference to the bequest prompted local historian Miriam Haskell to investigate in 1994. Haskell, who was writing a biography of Lucy Farnsworth, obtained permission to review the estate's legal files at the Knox County Registry of Deeds. Most of the documents were routine: property transfers, tax filings, the establishment of the museum trust. But among the correspondence between Lucy Farnsworth and her attorney, a man named Alden Brewster, Haskell found a letter dated October 11, 1923. The letter was written by Brewster to Lucy Farnsworth and addressed to her at the Elm Street residence. It was brief, formal, and deeply strange. "Dear Miss Farnsworth," the letter read, "I have reviewed the matter we discussed and have consulted with the appropriate parties. I am prepared to formalize the agreement regarding the music room as you have specified. The terms will be incorporated into the trust documents upon your death, and all future custodians of the property will be bound accordingly. I must confess that I do not fully understand the nature of this arrangement, but I have followed your instructions precisely. Please confirm receipt of this letter at your earliest convenience. Respectfully yours, Alden Brewster." No response from Lucy Farnsworth has been found. No additional correspondence between her and Brewster references the music room. The agreement mentioned in the letter is not detailed in any surviving document. Haskell attempted to locate Brewster's personal files, hoping to find additional context. She discovered that Brewster had died in 1931, 4 years before Lucy Farnsworth, and that his papers had been donated to the Maine State Library. She traveled to Augusta to examine them. The collection was extensive, 40 years of legal correspondence, case files, and personal journals. Haskell spent 3 weeks reviewing the material. She found only one additional reference to the Farnsworth music room. In a journal entry dated October 14, 1923, 3 days after his letter to Lucy Farnsworth, Brewster wrote, "The arrangement is complete. I have done as she asked, though I cannot say I understand it. She claims that the room has not required cleaning since 1891, when the agreement was first made. I asked who the other party was. She would not say. She told me only that it was not my concern, and that the arrangement would continue long after we were both gone. I believe her. I do not know why, but I believe her." 1891, 32 years before Brewster's letter, 44 years before Lucy Farnsworth's death, 134 years before the present day. No record exists of any event in 1891 that might explain the origin of the agreement. Lucy Farnsworth would have been 52 years old that year. Her father had died in 1876, her mother in 1884. She was already living alone in the house, already reclusive, already withdrawing from the world. Whatever happened in 1891, she never documented it. The music room remains part of the homestead tour today. Visitors pass through it briefly, admiring the Victorian furnishings and the antique piano. Few notice the absence of dust. Fewer still think to ask why the room looks as though it was cleaned that morning. Current staff members are aware of the anomaly. According to a 2018 interview with the museum's facilities manager, a woman named Patricia Bowman, the music room has been informally excluded from all cleaning schedules since at least the 1960s. "We don't talk about it much," Bowman said. "It's just one of those things. The room doesn't get dirty. We don't know why. We stopped asking a long time ago." Bowman confirmed that periodic tests have been conducted over the years, leaving glasses of water on surfaces to check for evaporation, placing strips of tape on the floor to detect foot traffic, monitoring the room with humidity sensors. All results have been normal. The room behaves in every measurable way, like any other room in the house, except that it never collects dust. In 2012, a visiting conservator from the Smithsonian Institution examined the music room as part of a routine assessment of the museum's historic properties. Her report, filed with the museum's board, contained a single anomalous note. "The music room presents an unusual preservation environment," she wrote. "Surfaces show no accumulation of particulate matter, despite the absence of climate control or filtration systems. I have no explanation for this observation. The room appears to be maintained by some means I cannot identify." She recommended no further action. The agreement, whatever it was, continues. The room remains clean. The other party, whoever they were, has never been identified. And somewhere in the silence of the music room, beneath the yellowed keys and the faded sheet music, something is keeping its end of the bargain. The Farnsworth homestead is open for tours from late May through October. The music room is included on the standard route. Visitors are welcome to examine the piano, the furniture, and the pristine surfaces that have not been cleaned in over 130 years. The agreement, whatever its terms, remains in effect. No one knows when it will end. Perhaps it never will. He checked in on a Friday in October. For 40 years, no one else could use his room. Then, without explanation, he was gone. Woodlawn, commonly known as the Black Mansion, stands on Surrey Road in Ellsworth, Maine, overlooking the Union River and the rolling hills of Hancock County. The house is a Georgian brick manor, built between 1824 and 1827 by Colonel John Black, a land agent who accumulated vast wealth managing timber holdings in eastern Maine. The mansion is notable for its formal gardens, its original furnishings, and its unbroken chain of family ownership that lasted until 1928, when the last black heir donated the property to the public. The house was never operated as a commercial inn. But like many estates of its era, Woodlawn maintained guest quarters for the steady stream of business associates, distant relatives, and social acquaintances who visited the Black family throughout the 19th century. These visits were recorded in a leather-bound registry that remains in the mansion's collection, a meticulous ledger of arrivals and departures spanning from 1841 to 1923. The registry is unremarkable for most of its pages. Names are entered in careful script, accompanied by dates of arrival, dates of departure, and the room assigned to each guest. The entries follow a predictable pattern. Visitors arrive, stay for days or weeks, and leave. The rooms turn over. Life continues until October 3, 1879. On that date, a guest was recorded as arriving at Woodlawn. The entry reads, Mr. Aldous Crane, Boston, Room 7, October 3, 1879. The departure column beside this entry is blank. Blank departure entries appear elsewhere in the registry. Guests who left without formal notice or whose checkout was simply never recorded by busy household staff. Such omissions are not unusual in 19th century record keeping. What is unusual is what happens on the pages that follow. Room 7 was a modest chamber on the second floor, overlooking the eastern garden. According to household inventories from the period, it contained a single bed, a washstand, a writing desk, and a small fireplace. It was one of 4 guest rooms maintained for visitors, neither the finest nor the least desirable. After October 3, 1879, every subsequent entry that might have assigned a guest to Room 7 contains a notation in a different hand, occupied. The next recorded guest, a Mr. William Daggett of Bangor, arrived on October 19, 1879, and was assigned to Room 5. The entry for Room 7 reads, occupied. A Mrs. Caroline Fletcher visited in December of that year and stayed in Room 4. Room 7, occupied. Throughout 1880, 1881, and every year thereafter, until 1919, the pattern continues. Guests come and go. Rooms are assigned and vacated, but Room 7 remains occupied, its status unchanged through 4 decades of entries. The word is always written in the same hand, not the hand that records the guest names, but a secondary script that appears only in the room assignment column for Room 7. Archivists who have examined the registry believe this secondary hand belonged to a member of the household staff, possibly a housekeeper or butler responsible for managing room allocations. Whoever wrote the word occupied did so consistently, without variation, for 40 years. In 1903, a local historian named Phineas Wardwell was granted access to the Black family papers as part of a project documenting Hancock County's prominent families. Wardwell spent several weeks at Woodlawn reviewing correspondence, financial records, and household documents. His notes, preserved in the Ellsworth Public Library, contain a brief reference to the guest registry. The registry presents an oddity, Wardwell wrote. A guest named Aldous Crane appears to have taken permanent residence in Room 7 beginning in October of 1879. The room has been marked as occupied continuously since that date. I inquired with Mr. Frederick Black regarding this matter, and he declined to discuss it. He stated only that the room was not available and changed the subject. Wardwell did not pursue the matter further. His published History of the Black Family, released in 1907, makes no mention of Aldous Crane or Room 7. Frederick Black, the family patriarch at the time of Wardwell's visit, died in 1910. His widow, Sarah, continued to live at Woodlawn until her death in 1924. Their son, George, managed the estate until donating it to the public in 1928. None of them, in any surviving letter, diary, or interview, ever mentioned Aldous Crane. The search for Aldous Crane himself has produced no results. No person by that name appears in Boston City directories from the 1870s or 1880s. No ship manifests record his arrival in Maine. No census, tax roll, or church registry contains his name. No obituary, no marriage record, no legal filing, nothing. In 1986, a genealogist named Helen Stoddard was hired by the Woodlawn Museum to research the identities of guests recorded in the registry. Stoddard successfully traced over 200 individuals, linking names to families, occupations, and eventual fates. Aldous Crane was the only guest she could not identify. "I searched every available database for the name Aldous Crane," Stoddard wrote in her final report. Boston records, Maine records, federal census data, immigration files, military records, professional directories. The name does not appear anywhere. It is as if the man existed only in the Woodlawn Guest Registry and nowhere else. Stoddard noted one additional anomaly. The handwriting that recorded Aldous Crane's arrival was consistent with the hand that recorded other guests in October of 1879, presumably the same household staff member. But the formation of the letters in Aldous Crane showed subtle irregularities. "The pen pressure is heavier than in surrounding entries," Stoddard observed. "The letters are slightly larger. The ink appears darker, as if the writer pressed harder or wrote more slowly. It may mean nothing. But it suggests that this entry was different somehow, that the person recording it hesitated or concentrated more carefully or felt uncertain about what they were writing." The room itself offers no explanation. Room 7 was photographed as part of a 1932 inventory of the mansion's contents. The images show a typical guest chamber: bed, washstand, desk, fireplace. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. Current staff members report that Room 7 is indistinguishable from the other historic bedrooms. It is included on the standard tour, and visitors pass through it without comment. No unusual phenomena have been reported. No cold spots, no strange sounds, no unexplained sensations. Just a room that was occupied for 40 years by a guest who never left and never existed. The registry entry for 1919 provides the final piece of the puzzle, or rather, deepens it. On March 7th of that year, 40 years and 5 months after Aldous Crane's arrival, a new entry appears in the room assignment column for Room 7. The word occupied has been crossed out with a single horizontal line. Beside it, in the same secondary hand that had written occupied for 4 decades, is a new word: vacant. No explanation accompanies this change. No death record for Aldous Crane appears in March of 1919. No letter, no diary entry, no newspaper article documents his departure. The room simply became available again, as if a guest had finally checked out after a stay of 14,697 days. What happened on March 7, 1919? The date offers one possible clue. March 7, 1919, was 3 months after the end of World War I, during the final wave of the influenza pandemic that killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide. Maine was hit particularly hard that winter. Hundreds died in cities and towns across the state. But no death record for Aldous Crane appears in any Maine registry from that period. No burial, no obituary, no evidence that he died, because there is no evidence that he ever lived. The guest registry remains in the collection of the Woodlawn Museum. The entry for Aldous Crane is on page 47, third from the top. The departure column is still blank, but the room is no longer occupied. Whatever stayed in Room 7 for 40 years finally left on a cold morning in March, in the last months of a pandemic, in the final weeks of a world that would never be the same. It left no forwarding address. Woodlawn, the Black Mansion, is open to the public from May through October. Room 7 is part of the standard tour. Visitors are welcome to examine the space where Aldous Crane reportedly stayed for 40 years, a man with no past, no records, and no explanation. The bed is made, the room is clean. The guest registry entry remains, written in ink that has not faded in 146 years. Checkout date, blank. Status, vacant. Since 1919, the room has been waiting for its next guest. Perhaps it is still waiting for the last one to return. The cornerstone was laid in 1855. The items inside it remembered things that hadn't happened yet. The Neal Dow Memorial stands at 714 Congress Street in Portland, Maine, a 3-story brick federal-style mansion that served as the home of Neal Dow, the fiery reformer known as the Father of Prohibition. Dow was a singular figure in American history, a wealthy businessman who devoted his life to the temperance movement, authored the Maine Law of 1851 that became the model for alcohol prohibition nationwide, and twice ran for President of the United States. His home, preserved as a museum since 1906, is a monument to 19th century reform politics and the complex legacy of the Temperance Crusade. The house was built in 1829, but Dow undertook significant renovations in 1855 after his election as mayor of Portland. As part of these renovations, a ceremonial cornerstone was laid at the northeast corner of the foundation, containing items meant to commemorate the moment for future generations, a tradition common in 19th century civic architecture. The cornerstone remained sealed for 107 years. In 1962, the Maine Women's Christian Temperance Union, which administered the property, authorized a renovation project to address structural issues in the foundation. The work required temporarily removing the cornerstone, providing the first opportunity since 1855 to examine its contents. The opening was conducted on September 14, 1962, witnessed by a small group that included the project contractor, 2 representatives from the Temperance Union, and a reporter from the Portland Press-Herald named Douglas Kimball. A photographer was present to document the event. The cornerstone, a granite block measuring approximately 18 inches on each side, was carefully extracted from the foundation. A copper box, green with age but intact, was found in the cavity behind it. The box was opened on site. Inside were several items consistent with an 1855 time capsule, a copy of the Portland Advertiser dated May 3, 1855, a daguerreotype portrait of Neal Dow, a temperance pledge card signed by Dow and several associates, and a small collection of coins from the 1850s. There were also 2 items that should not have been there. The first was a newspaper clipping, carefully folded and preserved in a separate envelope within the box. The clipping was from the Eastern Argus, a Portland newspaper that operated from 1803 to 1891. It was dated November 22, 1847. The article described the passage of what it called the Prohibition Measure, a law banning the sale of alcohol in Maine. The Maine law, the first statewide prohibition statute in American history, was not passed until 1851, 4 years after the newspaper's date. Douglas Kimball, the reporter present at the opening, documented his observations in a notebook that was later donated to the Maine Historical Society. "The clipping appears genuine," he wrote. "The paper stock, the typeface, the ink, all consistent with 1840s printing. But the content describes an event that did not occur until 1851. I have no explanation for this discrepancy." Kimball contacted the Maine Historical Society that afternoon to verify whether the Maine law might have been passed earlier than commonly recorded, or whether a preliminary version might have been enacted in 1847. The Society's archivist, a woman named Constance Pelletier, conducted an extensive review of legislative records. Her findings were unambiguous. No prohibition measure of any kind was passed in Maine in 1847. The first attempt at statewide prohibition came in 1846 and failed. The successful bill was introduced in 1851 and signed into law on June 2nd of that year. The newspaper clipping described something that wouldn't happen for another 4 years and described it in the past tense. The second anomalous item was a photograph. It was a small albumin print, approximately 3 inches by 4 inches, depicting the Neal Dow Memorial from an elevated exterior perspective. The image showed the front facade of the house, the Congress Street sidewalk, and a portion of the neighboring buildings. The photograph was remarkably clear with sharp detail and good contrast. The angle of the photograph presented an immediate problem. The image was taken from above and to the west of the house, from a vantage point approximately 40 feet in the air. The perspective was consistent with a photograph taken from the upper floor of a building directly across Congress Street and slightly to the north. In 1855, when the cornerstone was laid, no such building existed. City directories and fire insurance maps from the period confirm that the lot across Congress Street was vacant in 1855. A commercial building was constructed there in 1878, but it was only 2 stories tall, not high enough to provide the angle shown in the photograph. That building was demolished in 1923. Nothing on the site today matches the required vantage point. In 1962, when the cornerstone was opened, the lot across the street contained a 1-story retail structure that has since been replaced by a parking garage. The photograph was taken from a building that has never existed. Gerald Osborne, an architectural historian from the University of Southern Maine, examined the photograph in 1987 as part of a study on early Portland photography. His analysis, included in a paper on 19th century urban documentation, addressed the anomaly directly. The perspective is physically impossible, given the known built environment of Congress Street in any era, Osborne wrote. I have examined fire insurance maps, city directories, and historical photographs from 1850 through the present. At no point has a structure existed at the necessary location and height to produce this image. The photograph depicts a view that could not have been captured. Osborne noted additional details that complicated the analysis. The photograph showed the Neal Dow Memorial with window shutters that, according to historical records, were not installed until 1863. It showed a gas lamp post on the sidewalk that city records indicate was erected in 1871. It showed a tree in the front garden that, based on its apparent size, would have required at least 30 years of growth. The photograph appeared to show the house not as it was in 1855, but as it would appear decades later, captured from a vantage point that never existed. Both items were removed from the copper box and taken to the Maine Historical Society for preservation. They remain in the Society's collection today, cataloged as provenance uncertain, with a notation referencing the 1962 cornerstone opening. Douglas Kimball's article about the cornerstone opening appeared in the Portland Press Herald on September 16, 1962. It was brief and factual, describing the event and the expected contents of the time capsule. It made no mention of the anachronistic newspaper clipping or the impossible photograph. Kimball was contacted by researchers on 3 occasions between 1975 and his death in 1994. Each time, he declined to discuss the anomalous items. In a 1982 letter to a graduate student researching 19th century time capsules, Kimball wrote, "I reported what I saw. What it meant is not for me to say. Some things are better left to the historians." The historians have not provided answers. When the renovation was completed in 1962, a new cornerstone was laid containing contemporary items, a 1962 newspaper, photographs of the renovation work, and a letter from the Women's Christian Temperance Union. The original copper box, minus the anomalous items, was returned to the cavity as well. The original newspaper clipping and photograph were not replaced in the cornerstone. They were deemed too fragile for continued storage in an uncontrolled environment and were transferred to archival preservation. They remain in Portland, carefully stored, impossible to explain. A newspaper that remembered an event 4 years before it occurred. A photograph taken from a building that was never constructed, showing details that would not exist for decades. Neil Dow died in 1897 at the age of 93. He was buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Portland, beneath a granite monument inscribed with his life's work. His papers, donated to the Maine Historical Society, contain no reference to the cornerstone contents, the anachronistic clipping, or the impossible photograph. If he knew what was placed in the box, he never said. If he understood how items from the future came to rest in a cornerstone laid in 1855, he took that knowledge to his grave. The Neil Dow Memorial is open to the public by appointment. The cornerstone remains in place, resealed since 1962. The newspaper clipping and the photograph are preserved in the Maine Historical Society's archives in Portland, available to researchers who submit appropriate requests. The clipping describes an event that hadn't happened. The photograph shows a view that couldn't exist. Both were waiting inside a box that had been sealed for 107 years, placed there by hands that somehow knew what was coming or remembered what had not yet occurred. The twins in the portrait have never moved. Their shadows have never stopped. The Merritt House stands on Route 25 in Standish, Maine, a modest colonial dwelling that has overlooked the road to Portland for nearly 250 years. Built in 1789 by Daniel Merritt, a Harvard-educated minister who served the local Congregational Church for over 4 decades, the house remained in the Merritt family until 1944, when the last surviving heir donated it to historic New England. It is a quiet property, white clapboards, central chimney, 12/12 windows, distinguished more by its authenticity than its grandeur. The house contains original furnishings spanning from the late 18th century through the Victorian era. Most are unremarkable: sturdy New England furniture, faded textiles, the accumulated possessions of a family that lived simply and saved carefully. Thousands of visitors have passed through the rooms without incident. But in the front parlor, above the fireplace mantel, hangs a portrait that has troubled curators for over 50 years. The painting depicts 2 young girls, approximately 8 or 9 years old, seated side by side on a wooden bench. They are dressed identically in pale blue frocks with white lace collars, their dark hair parted in the middle and pulled back in ribbons. Their faces are nearly indistinguishable: round cheeks, small mouths, dark eyes that stare directly at the viewer with the solemn composure expected of children in formal portraiture. According to family records, the subjects are Patience and Prudence Merritt, twin daughters of the Reverend Daniel Merritt, born in 1774. The portrait was commissioned in 1783 when the girls were 9 years old. The artist is unknown, the painting is unsigned, and no receipt or correspondence regarding its commission has survived. The twins themselves did not survive long after the portrait was completed. Both girls died in the winter of 1785, within 3 days of each other, during an outbreak of scarlet fever that claimed several children in the Standish area. They were buried in the cemetery beside their father's church. Their gravestones, still legible, stand side by side beneath an ancient oak. The portrait has hung in the same location since at least 1820, according to household inventories. It has been cleaned twice, once in 1908 and again in 1973, but has never been removed from its frame or subjected to restoration beyond surface preservation. In 1967, the portrait was photographed for the first time as part of a cataloging project undertaken by Historic New England. A staff photographer named William Everett spent 2 days at the Merritt House, documenting furnishings for the organization's archives. His photograph of the twins' portrait, taken on the morning of June 14th, became the baseline for what would eventually become a deeply unsettling archive. The photograph itself was unremarkable. It showed the portrait as it appeared to the naked eye: two girls, a wooden bench, a neutral background rendered in muted browns. A single light source, implied by the painted shadows, fell from the upper left of the composition, casting shadows beneath the girls' chins, behind the bench, and along the folds of their dresses. The shadow angles were consistent with late afternoon light entering from a west-facing window, a reasonable artistic choice for a portrait painted in a New England parlor. In 1973, after the portrait was cleaned, a second photograph was taken by a different staff member. When this image was compared to the 1967 photograph during routine archival work, a discrepancy was noted. The shadows had moved. The shift was subtle, a matter of perhaps 2 or 3 degrees. The shadow beneath Patience's chin, the girl on the left, fell at a slightly steeper angle in the 1973 photograph than in the 1967 image. The shadow cast by the bench showed a similar variation. The differences were small enough to be dismissed as variations in camera angle or room lighting. They were not dismissed. Margaret Aldrich, the archivist who first noticed the discrepancy, requested that the portrait be photographed again under controlled conditions. In October of 1973, a photographer returned to the Merritt House with calibrated equipment and documented lighting. The portrait was photographed from a fixed distance, at a fixed height, with a fixed aperture. The shadows had moved again. Aldrich documented this finding in an internal memorandum dated November 2, 1973. The shadow angles in the October 1973 photograph differ measurably from both previous images, she wrote. The light source implied by the painted shadows appears to have shifted approximately 4 degrees clockwise since the June 1967 photograph. I have no explanation for this observation. The memorandum was filed without action. The portrait remained on display. Over the following decades, the twins' portrait was photographed repeatedly, sometimes as part of routine documentation, sometimes by researchers investigating the shadow phenomenon specifically. By 2015, the historic New England archives contained 217 photographs of the painting, spanning 48 years. In 2016, a conservation specialist named Dr. Rebecca Thornton was granted access to the complete photographic archive as part of a study on environmental effects on oil paintings. Thornton, who had no prior knowledge of the shadow anomaly, was asked to analyze the images for evidence of paint degradation, color shift, or surface damage. Her findings were unexpected. The paint surface shows no significant change across the photographic record, Thornton wrote in her report. Color values remain stable within expected parameters. There is no evidence of flaking, cracking, or varnish deterioration that would alter the appearance of the work, she continued. However, the shadow angles within the composition show consistent variation across the image set. Using digital analysis software, I measured the angle of the primary shadow beneath the left subject's chin in all 217 photographs. The measurements range from approximately 31 degrees to approximately 47 degrees, relative to vertical. The variation appears to follow a gradual progression, with shadow angles shifting clockwise at a rate of approximately 0.3 degrees per year. Thornton noted that the rate of change was remarkably consistent. When graphed over time, the shadow angles formed a nearly linear progression, suggesting not random variation, but systematic movement. If this trend continues at the observed rate, she wrote, the implied light source will complete a full 360-degree rotation in approximately 1,200 years. The cause of the variation could not be determined. Thornton ruled out camera positioning, room lighting, and photographic processing as explanatory factors. The controlled photographs from 1973 onward eliminated most sources of measurement error. The shadow angles were changing within the painting itself, but the paint was not moving. Microscopic analysis of the portrait surface, conducted in 2017, confirmed that the physical paint layer showed no evidence of alteration. The brushstrokes remained fixed. The pigments remained stable. Whatever was causing the shadows to shift was not detectable at the material level. Thornton consulted with 3 colleagues, a physicist, an optical engineer, and a specialist in art forgery detection. None could offer an explanation. "The shadows appear to move," Thornton wrote in her concluding remarks, "but the paint does not. This is, to my knowledge, physically impossible. I have documented the phenomenon, but cannot explain it." The portrait remains in the front parlor of the Merritt House, hanging in the same location it has occupied for over 2 centuries. Visitors pass by it daily during the summer tour season, glancing briefly at the 2 solemn girls in their blue dresses before moving on to the next room. Few notice the shadows. In 2019, a graduate student from the Massachusetts College of Art named Yuki Anderson requested permission to conduct a time-lapse study of the portrait. Anderson proposed installing a camera in the parlor to photograph the painting at regular intervals over a 12-month period, capturing any visible changes in real time. The request was denied by Historic New England's Collections Committee. The official reason cited was concern about equipment interference with the historic environment. No further explanation was provided. Anderson submitted a Freedom of Information request for the committee's meeting minutes. The request was denied on the grounds that Historic New England is a private organization and not subject to public disclosure requirements. The photographic archive remains closed to independent researchers. Thornton's report has not been published. The 217 photographs sit in a climate-controlled storage facility in Haverhill, Massachusetts, documenting 50 years of impossible movement. The twins themselves lie in the churchyard in Standish, beneath stones that have not moved since 1785. Patience on the left, Prudence on the right, just as they appear in the portrait. The shadows on their gravestones fall according to the position of the sun, shifting predictably from morning to evening, following the laws of physics that govern all ordinary things. The shadows in the painting follow different laws, or perhaps no laws at all. The Merritt House is open for tours from June through October. The twins' portrait hangs above the fireplace in the front parlor, where it has remained since at least 1820. Visitors are welcome to examine it. The girls stare out from the canvas with the same expression they have worn for 240 years, patient, prudent, waiting. Their shadows fall at angles that will be slightly different tomorrow than they are today. No one knows why. No one knows when or if they will stop. The window broke on schedule for over a century. Then, when the next break was due, the glass simply disappeared. The Joshua L. Chamberlain House stands at 226 Main Street in Brunswick, a handsome Greek Revival dwelling that has overlooked Bowdoin College since 1824. The house is famous as the home of one of America's most celebrated Civil War heroes, the college professor who became a general, who held the Union line at Little Round Top during Gettysburg, and who was chosen to receive the formal surrender of Confederate forces at Appomattox. Chamberlain lived in the house from 1871 until his death in 1914, and his presence still permeates every room, from the study where he wrote his memoirs to the bedroom where he died from wounds received 50 years before. The house was acquired by the Pejepscot Historical Society in 1983 and opened to the public as a museum. It has been meticulously preserved, its furnishings and architectural details maintained to reflect the decades when Chamberlain walked its halls. But one element of the house has resisted preservation. One window on the second floor, facing east toward the college campus, has followed a pattern that no curator has been able to explain. The window is located in a small room at the rear of the second floor, adjacent to what was once a servant's quarters. The room was used primarily for storage during Chamberlain's lifetime. Inventories describe it as containing trunks, unused furniture, and seasonal items. It was not a significant space. The window itself is standard for the period, a 6/6 double-hung sash, approximately 30 inches wide and 54 inches tall, set into a simple wooden frame. The first documented replacement occurred in 1871, the same year Chamberlain purchased the house. Household accounts from that October include an entry for window glass, east storage room, replaced due to unexplained fracturing. The cost was $2.40 paid to a local glazier named Hosea Dunning. No further details are provided. The nature of the fracturing is not described. The second replacement occurred in 1899. A letter from Chamberlain's wife, Fanny, to her sister in Boston mentions the incident in passing. "We have had some small troubles with the house this month. The window in the back storage room fractured again, just as it did years ago. Joshua says it must be a flaw in the frame, but the carpenter finds nothing wrong. We have replaced the glass and think no more of it." The interval between replacements, 28 years. The third replacement occurred in 1923, 9 years after Chamberlain's death. By then, the house was owned by his descendants, who continued to maintain it as a private residence. A receipt from a Brunswick hardware store, preserved in the family papers, documents the purchase of replacement glass for the east window, second floor rear, on March 15, 1923. The interval from the previous replacement, 24 years. The fourth replacement occurred in 1948. A handwritten note in the household maintenance log, kept by Chamberlain's granddaughter Rosamond, reads, "March 17th, east storage window shattered overnight. No apparent cause. Replaced same week." The interval, 25 years. The fifth replacement occurred in 1977, 2 years after Rosamond's death, and 6 years before the house was acquired by the Historical Society. A contractor's invoice from that year documents the work. Replacement of fractured window glass, second floor storage room, east exposure. Glass found cracked in radial pattern from center. No impact point visible. Cause unknown. The interval, 29 years. When historians later examined these records, they noted that the average interval between replacements was exactly 26 years. The variations, 24, 25, 28, 29, clustered tightly around this figure. The probability of 5 random window failures occurring at such regular intervals was calculated by a statistician at Bowdoin College in 1992. The probability was approximately 1 in 17,000. Following the pattern, the next replacement should have occurred in 2003. The Pejepscot Historical Society was aware of the window's history by the late 1990s. A curator named Donald Farrington had compiled the replacement records as part of a comprehensive maintenance history of the property and had noted the unusual regularity of the failures. In a 1998 memorandum to the Society's board, Farrington wrote, "The east storage window has fractured 5 times since 1871, at intervals averaging 26 years. If this pattern holds, the next failure should occur around 2003. I recommend we monitor the window and document any changes." The board authorized quarterly photographic documentation of the window beginning in January of 2000. The photographs from 2000, 2001, and 2002 show nothing unusual. The glass is intact. The frame is stable. The room beyond is unchanged. The photograph from March of 2003 shows an empty frame. The glass had vanished. The discovery was made on the morning of March 19, 2003, by a volunteer docent named Patricia Harding. Harding had arrived early to prepare the house for a school tour when she noticed a draft coming from the second floor. Upon investigation, she found the east storage room window frame completely empty. The glass was gone, not shattered, not cracked, simply absent. There was no glass on the floor, Harding stated in her incident report. No fragments on the windowsill or outside on the ground. I checked everywhere. The glass had just disappeared. The putty that held it in place was still there, but it was dry and crumbled, like it had been exposed to air for years. A thorough search of the property found no trace of the missing glass. The ground beneath the window was examined. The storage room was emptied and inspected. The adjacent rooms were searched. Nothing. The window frame itself showed no signs of forced entry, vandalism, or tampering. The lock was secure. The putty, as Harding noted, had aged dramatically. Conservators estimated it had the appearance of glazing compound that had been exposed to the elements for at least a decade, despite having been applied during a routine maintenance check only 4 years earlier. Farrington documented the incident in a detailed report that remains in the Society's archives. The glass has not broken, he wrote. It has not fallen. It has not been removed by any identifiable means. It has simply ceased to be present. I have no explanation for this event. The window was reglazed in April of 2003. New glass was installed, new putty applied, and the frame repainted. The work was completed by a local contractor named Stephen Dion, who had performed maintenance on the property for 15 years. Dion later told a reporter from the Brunswick Times-Record that the job was straightforward, nothing unusual. But he added a detail that was not included in his invoice. When I was fitting the new glass, Dion said, I noticed something scratched into the wood on the inside of the frame. It looked like tally marks, groups of 4 with a diagonal line through them like you'd use to count something. I counted them up. There were 5 groups, 26 marks total. Dion photographed the marks before painting over them as part of the restoration. The photograph shows faint scratches in the wood, weathered but visible, arranged in the pattern he described. 26 marks, 5 groups, 5 replacements, 26-year intervals. The marks appeared to have been made over an extended period. The first group was darker, more worn. The 5th group was lighter, sharper, as if someone or something had been keeping count. The origin of the marks could not be determined. They had been concealed beneath multiple layers of paint, suggesting they predated the most recent repainting in 1991. But how far back they went and who had made them remains unknown. The window has not failed since 2003. As of the present date, 22 years have passed without incident. If the pattern holds, the next event should occur around 2029. The Pejepscot Historical Society continues to monitor the window. Quarterly photographs are still taken. The glass remains intact. The frame shows no signs of stress, but the marks are still there beneath the paint. And somewhere in the mathematics of the house, in the strange arithmetic that has governed this window for over 150 years, the count continues. 26 years, 5 cycles completed, 1 window that breaks when it should, that vanished when it was due to break, that keeps its own tally in scratches no one remembers making. The Joshua L. Chamberlain House is open to the public from late May through October. The east storage room is not included on the standard tour, but visitors may glimpse the window from the second-floor hallway. It looks ordinary. It functions normally. It is, by all appearances, just a window. The next scheduled event, if the pattern holds, is 2029, 4 years from now. The count continues. The cellar is growing. No one knows how. No one wants to measure it again. The Hamilton House stands on a bluff overlooking the Salmon Falls River in South Berwick, Maine, one of the most photographed colonial homes in New England. Built around 1785 by Jonathan Hamilton, a prosperous merchant who made his fortune in the West Indies trade. The house is a Georgian masterpiece, 5 bays wide, 2.5 stories tall, with a grand central hall, and views that stretch across the river into New Hampshire. It was rescued from neglect in 1898 by two Boston women, Emily Tyson and Elise Tyson Vaughan, who restored it as a summer retreat and filled it with colonial antiques. They donated the property to the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities, now Historic New England, in 1949. The house has been carefully maintained ever since. Its exterior has been repainted, its gardens replanted, its furnishings conserved. Above ground, the Hamilton House is a model of historic preservation, frozen in graceful tribute to the 18th century. Below ground, something is different. The cellar of the Hamilton House is a full foundation, extending beneath the entire footprint of the main structure. It is accessed by a narrow stairway near the kitchen, descending into a space of packed earth floors, granite foundation walls, and heavy timber joists that have supported the house for nearly 240 years. The cellar was used historically for food storage, with evidence of root cellars, a dairy cool room, and storage bins for provisions. It is not open to the public. In 1904, the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities commissioned a comprehensive architectural survey of the Hamilton House as part of its acquisition documentation. The survey was conducted by a Boston firm specializing in historic properties, and the resulting report included detailed measurements of every room, hallway, and structural element. The cellar was measured at 1,200 square feet. The measurement was unremarkable. It corresponded appropriately to the footprint of the house above, accounting for the thickness of the foundation walls and the irregularities common in 18th century construction. The survey noted that the cellar was divided into 3 primary chambers, connected by low archways, with ceiling heights varying from 6 feet 2 inches to 6 feet 8 inches. The report was filed, and the cellar received no particular attention for the next 83 years. In 1987, Historic New England undertook a structural assessment of the Hamilton House in preparation for foundation repairs. The assessment required accurate measurements of the cellar to plan drainage improvements and address moisture issues common in riverside properties. A preservation architect named Lawrence Harding was contracted to conduct the work. Harding used laser distance measurement technology, which had become standard in architectural documentation by the mid-1980s. Over 2 days in October, he measured the cellar's dimensions, wall positions, and ceiling heights, with equipment accurate to within a quarter inch. His measurements did not match the 1904 survey. According to Harding's report, submitted in November of 1987, the cellar measured 1,340 square feet, 140 square feet larger than the 1904 documentation indicated. I initially assumed the discrepancy was due to measurement error in the original survey, Harding wrote in his report. Early 20th century measurement techniques were less precise than modern methods. However, upon reviewing the 1904 documentation, I found no indication of uncertainty or approximation. The measurements appear to have been carefully taken and clearly recorded. Harding remeasured the cellar 3 times over the following week. Each measurement confirmed his original finding, 1,340 square feet. He also noted that the cellar's configuration had changed. The 1904 survey described 3 chambers of roughly equal size. Harding's survey documented 3 chambers of unequal size, plus a 4th, smaller alcove in the northeast corner that the original survey did not mention. The alcove appears to be original construction, Harding wrote. The stonework is consistent with the rest of the foundation. There is no evidence of later modification, no tooling marks or mortar differences that would suggest the space was added after initial construction. Yet the 1904 survey makes no reference to it. Harding included a recommendation in his report. Given the discrepancy between historical and current measurements, I suggest a comprehensive archaeological and architectural investigation of the cellar to determine whether undocumented modifications have occurred. The recommendation was not acted upon. The foundation repairs proceeded based on Harding's measurements, and the discrepancy was noted in the project file without further investigation. In 2015, Historic New England initiated a new documentation project for its properties, using updated digital surveying technology. The Hamilton House was included in the first phase of this project. A team from a Portland engineering firm was contracted to produce three-dimensional scans of several buildings, including complete documentation of foundations and cellars. The team visited the Hamilton House in August of 2015. The cellar scan was completed in a single afternoon using terrestrial laser scanning equipment capable of accuracy within 1/16 of an inch. The results were not what anyone expected. According to the 2015 survey, the cellar measured 1,380 square feet, 40 square feet larger than the 1987 measurement, and 180 square feet larger than the 1904 survey. The project manager, a woman named Catherine Merrill, initially suspected equipment malfunction. She recalibrated the scanner and repeated the measurement the following day. The result was identical, 1,380 square feet. Merrill contacted Historic New England's preservation director, a man named Thomas Ashford, to report the discrepancy. Their correspondence, obtained through a public records request in 2019, reveals the organization's response. "I have reviewed the survey data you provided," Ashford wrote on September 3, 2015. "I have also reviewed the 1904 and 1987 documentation. I agree that the measurements are inconsistent and that the inconsistency cannot be explained by measurement error alone. However, I am not prepared to authorize further investigation at this time. Please finalize your report using the 2015 measurements and note the historical discrepancy in an appendix." Merrill complied. Her final report documented the cellar at 1,380 square feet with a 3-page appendix detailing the measurement history and acknowledging that no explanation for the growth had been identified. The cellar had expanded by 140 square feet between 1904 and 1987, a period of 83 years. It had expanded by an additional 40 square feet between 1987 and 2015, a period of 28 years. The rate of growth appeared to be accelerating. Local historians and preservation specialists who have examined the data have proposed various explanations. Some suggest that the 1904 survey was simply inaccurate, that early measurers miscounted or misrecorded the dimensions. But the 1904 report shows no signs of carelessness. Other measurements in the document have been verified against physical evidence and proven accurate. Others have proposed that the cellar walls are shifting inward at the top while remaining stable at the base, creating an illusion of increased floor area. But Harding's 1987 survey and Merrill's 2015 scan both measured the walls as essentially vertical, with no significant lean or displacement. A third theory suggests that the packed earth floor has subsided over time, exposing previously buried portions of the foundation walls and incrementally increasing the measured floor area. But soil analysis conducted during the 1987 drainage project found no evidence of significant subsidence, and the ceiling heights documented in all three surveys remain consistent within an inch. No theory has been accepted, no explanation has been confirmed. In 2018, a graduate student at the University of New Hampshire named Marcus Ridley requested permission to conduct a fourth survey of the cellar as part of a thesis on measurement anomalies in historic structures. His request was reviewed by Historic New England's Collections Committee. It was denied. The denial letter, signed by Thomas Ashford, stated, "After careful consideration, the committee has determined that additional survey work in the Hamilton House cellar is not warranted at this time. The existing documentation is sufficient for preservation planning purposes, and further investigation would not contribute meaningfully to the organization's mission. Ridley appealed the decision. His appeal was denied without comment. He submitted a Freedom of Information request for the committee's meeting minutes. Historic New England, as a private nonprofit organization, was not required to comply. The minutes have never been released. The Hamilton House remains open for tours from June through October. Visitors can explore the first and second floors, admire the colonial furnishings, and enjoy the views of the Salmon Falls River. The cellar is not accessible to the public. Below the floorboards, beneath the carefully preserved rooms where Jonathan Hamilton once entertained guests and counted his fortune, the cellar sits in darkness. Its walls are the same granite blocks that were laid in 1785. Its timbers are the same beams that have held the house for nearly 240 years. But its dimensions are not what they were, and no one knows what they will be tomorrow. The Hamilton House is located at 40 Vaughn's Lane in South Berwick, Maine. Tours are available seasonally through Historic New England. The cellar remains closed to visitors. The last authorized measurement was conducted in 2015. At that time, the cellar measured 1,380 square feet. That was 10 years ago. No fourth survey has been scheduled. Perhaps no one wants to know what it would find.